Good evening, everyone. This is the July 10th, 2018 Yarmouth Board of Selectmen meeting. We're going to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we'll open the meeting with public comments. Is there anyone that would like to speak to the board?
Vita Morris. I'm not sure of how many of you read the notice that was enclosed with the water bill last week. I really wasn't sure what to make of it. I have to read most of it in order to get the gist of what went on here. A sample collected in the interconnection with Hyannis water system on January 2, 2018 was found to contain total coliform bacteria. As a result, the water department was required to collect samples from our water system for total coliform analysis. The required samples were collected but were analyzed for enterococci instead of total coliform in error. We were not aware of this error until we were notified by the Mass DEP. However, this constituted a treatment technique trigger. We failed to notify the Massachusetts Department of the treatment technique trigger within 5 days, which is a reporting violation. Yarmouth Water Department was required by the revised total coliform rule to conduct an assessment within 30 days in response to the treatment technique trigger. We failed to complete the RTC assessment in the required time frame, which is an RTC treatment technique violation. Failure to notify Mass DEP of the treatment technique violation is a reporting violation. The failure to complete the RTC assessment within the required time frame required a public notice, which was not provided within the required time frame. We failed to report the EET results to Mass DEP within the required time frame, which is a reporting violation. Now, there's a little bit more. I don't know. Obviously, somebody who wrote that must have smoked something other than a regular cigarette, I would say. And I mean, and the thing is that there's nothing, it says, what does this mean? Well, it means that, if any other such matters occur, they'll notify us within 24 hours, at which point I think most of the people would know from their body that there's something wrong with the water. And I don't know what to make of this. I mean, is this person still employed by the town? But what's going on here? Nowhere do they say that as of such and such a date, we are in total compliance with whatever the water requirement purity is. Nowhere. There's just something about they sort of did some kind of, they're in compliance with assessment or something. I wish somebody would look into this, but I mean, it would be comical if it weren't so serious, considering that this is water and it's from a well that apparently goes to the water that we sell to Hyannis. Are we trying to poison the Hyannis people too, unbeknownst to them? I mean, honestly, it's just amazing.
So it is, that's a lot of legalese in there that DEP requires. So when you have a high count on a coliform test, at this location it was the interconnect pipe. The resubmission sample that we submitted was tested, that was called for the wrong bacterium. So that ended up being a situation where, because it was the wrong test result, it ended up missing the notification, because once you get that, you're supposed to retest within a certain number of days. That triggered this letter, this requirement to send a letter. Subsequent testing, the right laboratory test, has indicated the water is fine. This coliform shows up in a lot of different water systems. It's not uncommon to have a retest event that goes on. My past water system, this occurred probably with some degree of frequency. The particular situation that was called for the wrong analytical test, sometimes my past experience, the laboratory should have assisted us with that analysis, but they didn't for whatever reason. We've addressed that. The Director of Public Works has indicated it won't happen again, and he took steps to make sure that that would be the case. But the
I'm
water
saying,
is
you
safe.
know, that's very interesting what you said, that it's sort of legalese, because one person with whom I spoke, everybody's shaking their heads, but one person said it smacks a little bit of legalese. So they kind
it's
of,
very legal.
you know, the way it's worded, I mean, it's sort of like a confession. 1, 2, 3, we didn't do this and we didn't do that, and oh my God, you know, you have to wonder what's going on here.
Okay. Thank you, Vita. Vita, I would caution you about sarcastic comments about individual employees. I, as chair, will not permit you to do that in the future. You did it once this evening to start your comments. It will not be permitted in the future, or your privileges to comment before this board will be removed. Thank you.
I didn't mention the person's name.
No, you didn't need to.
How many people know who that person is?
Your courtesy is being asked for.
Steve Krinsman from Yarmouth, Port Mass. Just a few seconds on Vineyard Wind, which I understand is coming up next week. I figured I'd get in before the rush, because I'm sure there'll be people here talking about that. I respectfully request we all wait until the facts are in. My understanding is we don't have anywhere near the facts that are completed, so anything that's discussed is a little premature. Lewis Bay and Vineyard Wind, in my mind, are not mutually exclusive. Vineyard Wind is going to have to go through an awful lot of testing, rules, regulations, state agencies, et cetera, and then they come to this board. I still have great faith in this board to protect our interests and make sure that we get the best deal, if you want to use that word, that we can, because I think wind is necessary, and I don't think it's mutually exclusive with Lewis Bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any further public comments, questions? Okay. We'll go on to our next agenda item, and that's a presentation to Chief Frederickson of the recognition pins for the Sergeant Gannon
Chief, as you know, at the direction of Selectmen Talley, the board worked with me and you and your command staff and the patrol
Oh, you have to go to the microphone.
You're away from mics.
to commission a commemorative pin in recognition of Sergeant Gannon's service. We'd like to present to you tonight the package of pins to be dispensed to the police community at your discretion. We all grieve tremendously with you and the police department. Selectman Talley designed this. It's a beautiful pin. I'm not sure if the camera can pick that up, but we'll have samples available for the public to view. So with that, I give you the first official pin in recognition of Sergeant Gannon's service to the town of Yarmouth.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Very meaningful coming from the Board of Selectmen and as representative for all department members. Your support was not unnoticed throughout the entire ordeal, and it still continues today. This is very special, and I will give one to each officer and put forward the kindness and the show of support that you showed to us. So I thank you very much, and we're going to wear this proudly. Thank you.
Would any board members like to add any comments at this point? We really appreciate the efforts of the entire police department and so many others during this very difficult time, and your leadership in particular was noticed dramatically by all the community. And thank you for everything that you have done.
Thank you.
I would just like to thank Eric for designing this pen. It really came out beautifully. And to you, Chief, I just say, let it be.
There you go.
You know, a little background, Chief, you know, immediately after the events of April 12th, the Board of Selectmen wanted to do something. You know, we know that Sergeant Gannon will always be in the hearts of you and your officers from around the country, as well as the people of Yarmouth. But you know, we wanted something physical to remember him by, and there was some talk about bracelets, and bracelets had been done before. I was a little bit disappointed to find out that the Cape Cod Baseball League had started selling pins, but I was reminded that those pins are for anybody who wished to purchase them. These pins are for you, your men. In the early stages of these talks, it was hoped that you would share them with perhaps state police, Dennis, Barnstable, but it's up to you entirely how they're distributed, whether or not they're part of an officer's uniform. But we felt strongly that it was important that we do something to commemorate Sergeant Gannon and the date. And I was very honored to be part of designing that, and I hope that they will keep you safe and wear them in good health.
I can tell you the outpouring has been special, and it coming from all types of angles that you would not expect. And when people have been presenting what they can do in their way of showing their support and their sorrow for what happened, it's been incredible. And every single thing that has come through the door, we have found a very appropriate spot or use for them, and they all mean something. And this is uniquely special because it's coming from you. It's representative of our town, you, and it will only go to our officers and a few who may be special. So it's going to, the purpose you intended it for is exactly how it's going to be used. So you can be sure of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
All right, we'll go on with our, when we get to public hearings, actually, we're advertised for 6:20.
They're actually advertised probably for 6.
Is it advertised for 5:45?
It's advertised for 6 p.m. It's just
6
on the
p.m.?
agenda.
Okay, we could proceed then. Then we have a application for special entertainment license.
Good evening, Pat.
Good evening.
I'll read the ad in, and then you can go from there. Board of Selectmen, acting as the local licensing authority for the town of Yarmouth, has received an application from Mary Franklin on behalf of the Yarmouth Recreation Department for a special entertainment license to provide live music with a 3-4-piece band and amplification at Parkers River Beach, 157 South Shore Drive, South Yarmouth, between the hours of 6 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. Music will be provided on July 12, 17, 26, and 31, and also on August 9th and August 14th. Hearing will be held on Tuesday, July 10th, 2018, in the hearing room at Town Hall, 1146 Route 28, South Yarmouth. The Selectmen's meeting begins at 6 p.m. Written comments will be accepted in the Selectmen's office until 4:30 p.m. on Friday, July 6, 2018. Verbal comments will be accepted at the hearing. So, Pat, why don't you tell us a little bit about the license that you're seeking?
Thank you. When I came before this board back in the winter and we were discussing beach fees, And the increase in beach fees, there was a recommendation and an encouragement on the part of the board for us to utilize our beaches in more of a social community way. So we added to our programming here in Yarmouth at the beaches this summer 3 events. One is a dodgeball game called Gaga Ball, which is very popular with the kids in town. So we have that 4 days a week at different beaches in the town. Second is a pickup soccer game on Tuesday nights at South Middle Beach, which has some good response so far, all for free. And then thirdly, we reached out to the high school and asked if they would like to have some of their members of the band and percussion play at Parkers River Beach. We already have a group on Monday nights sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce as well as the Cultural Foundation or the Arts Foundation. So it was recommended that we have 2 groups come and play. One, the DY Jazz Band under Dylan Rothier, who's been playing at the Cultural Center and some of the other places here in town, well-known, all our local kids from DY. And second, a young man named Patrick Hanbury, who's presently has a band called Patty and the Boys. It's an Irish folk rock band, and Patrick is a former DY band member who is now studying at Northeastern, and he plays in local venues such as the Sons of Aaron and St. Pius, and he works at Captain Parker's, and he is well known in the community and well followed. So those 2 groups, which would have some interchangeable players from the DY Jazz Band under Dylan, and then Patty and his group would be all 3-piece bands playing at Parkers River from 6 to 7:30. Same setup as we have for the Cultural, in the Arts Foundation and the Chambers concert series, but they are Monday nights, and we're thinking that Tuesday nights, so that you can enjoy that yourselves. The timing isn't good for you, but maybe for others who tape your meetings so that they would go to and then hear you afterwards, would be there. So that's what I bring before you tonight. These are all free concerts. We're not making any donations or collections. They're sponsored by and paid for from monies within our offset budget as new seasonal programs, and we're working hard to generate those revenues to bring free community entertainment.
Thank you. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to be heard on this? Seeing none, we did get one email, at least only one that I'm aware of, from Phil Wilson and Sharon Wilson. It's dated July 2nd. It says, thank you for notifying us abutters, parentheses, Cottage 36, 135 South Shore Drive, close parentheses, about proposed summer concerts with acoustic amplifiers. Please pass on our concerns that we discussed on the phone about summer early evening band concerts with amplifiers at Parkers River Beach. We have guests at our beach cottage bordering Parkers River Beach who expect a peaceful dinner and may be putting very young children to bed. A major attraction is that this is normally a very quiet area suitable for young family vacationers. Amplified concerts completely change the character and nature of the area. Thank you for your response. And they list their names and telephone number, and this was written, incidentally, to Linda Dennehy, the assistant to the town administrator. So that's the only public input that I'm aware of. Would you like to respond to that, Pat?
Well, as normally, as the other concerts are established, we try to face our speakers out to the ocean, and so that the noise goes forward. Speaking with a sound engineer, which I've had the pleasure of doing recently for other issues as well, I've been asked to, understand how sound travels across the water and as it comes out of speakers, and so we're looking to face it directly forward towards Nantucket Sound so that it will spread out but not backwards. Oops. And the location of the band is on the back porch of the concession stand, which is pretty much in the middle of the beach. So it's equally distant from the Seaside Village condos as it would be from the I call them the 9-month condos. I know that there's a Ship C or something. Is that who these came from?
It was on here.
Just gave an address.
Clipper Ship.
Yeah, Clipper Ship. So hopefully, and we do monitor them. We have staff there. We need to unlock the picnic tables that are secured on the deck so that people can set up for their music and do that sort of thing. So if there were a concern, we certainly would address it. But we've never received any face-to-face concerns or calls to the police with the other concert series that the Chamber runs, and they have bands of much larger and more professional presentations, so their speakers are bigger, their amplification is much louder, and I don't expect that this would have as much of an impact on the community.
That's why I was a little bit surprised to see this, as you anticipated my next question, which was whether you got any complaints about the Monday night events, and why all of a sudden, because that's been going on for how many years now?
Oh, over 25, I believe. And, I mean, we run out of parking spots for that concert, and they're parking down at Seaview and Beach and down the street because it's so popular.
Okay, does anybody on the board have any questions of Pat?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
We have a motion to close the public portion of the hearing. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed?
Make a motion to approve the application as presented.
We have a second?
Second.
Right. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
Next hearing, Mr. Chairman, on licensing is a special alcohol and entertainment license for Irish and Country Festival. Good evening.
Good evening, how you doing?
Do you want to identify yourself for the record, please?
Sure, Patrick McDonough.
Patrick, I'll read the legal ad in, and then you can go forward at that point.
Sure.
The Board of Selectmen, acting as the local licensing authority for the town of Yarmouth, has received applications from Patrick McDonough on behalf of Mac Nation Events, LLC, for special wine and malt and entertainment licenses for the Yarmouth Irish and Country Festival to be held at the former drive-in site at 669 Route 28, West Yarmouth, on Saturday, August 18th, 2018. Festival hours will be 1 to 10 p.m. Entertainment will include public show and live music with various bands and amplification. The festival will also include food trucks, vendors, and games for children. Hearing will be held on Tuesday, July 10th, 2018, in the hearing room at Town Hall, 1146 Route 28, South Yarmouth. The Selectmen's meeting begins at 6 p.m. Written comments will be accepted in the Selectmen's office until 4:30 p.m. on Friday, July 6, 2018. Verbal comments will be accepted at the hearing. Okay, Patrick, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you plan to do, and the setup, the arrangement,
Sure.
and what licenses you're seeking.
Absolutely. So, as you probably recall, we ran an Irish event during the March timing of the parade, which we deemed to be successful. We learned a great deal from the use of the land, like the ins and outs of what can be done and what can't be done. So it was basically a learning experience that we intend to put in our agenda moving forward. So, one of the things that we seek to do is continue to work with the town of Yarmouth to explore different uses of the land. And I've been working with Karen Green and Kathy Williams, and she's been in tangent with the DPW to orchestrate different plans to try to prepare the land with things that we pointed out from the last festival that we technically needed to run an event there. And so one of the things that they put on the table was clearing out, some of the area for parking on the inside, because what's different about this event, unlike March, is that, the businesses are technically, everybody's in business in August. And so we need basically as much parking as we possibly can in the area. So they looked at the plan, and they deemed that they could definitely prepare the land to provide over a couple hundred parking spots in time for an event in August. And one of the things that we're pretty proud of is that the event that we ran in March was we deemed it safe. We deemed it a nice environment that people enjoyed, And we wanted to test the waters again for an event during the in-season, we'll call it, as well as exploring maybe other events during the off-season as well. So that's pretty much the plan. And we want to do an Irish festival from 1 to 5, and then change the genre to a country festival from 5 to 10. And that would encompass, obviously, a stage, live music, and food trucks.
Okay. I don't know if there's any staff here. I don't know, Dan, if you can answer this. We didn't get any negative feedback, did we, about the Irish event?
We did not.
No alcohol issues, anything like that? Okay. Patrick, you're applying for a beer and wine license?
Correct, yes.
Okay, because that's what you say in your application, but then on one of the pages, it says all alcohol.
Yeah, it's
And because you're a for-profit
correct, yes.
entity, we can only give you the beer and wine.
Correct, yes.
Do you understand that?
Yes, yes.
Is there anybody out in the audience that would like to be heard on this? Seeing none, I'll go to the board. Anyone on the board have any questions?
In terms of your alcohol service, will that change at all from the last festival, or will it stay the same?
Pretty much stayed the same. I mean, one of the learns that we had from last time was that we wanted to have the beer trucks, the beer truck as far back from the road. Like, our original plan was to have something closer to the road, but we put it as far back in the venue as possible. All of our servers are tip certified. We're actually waiting for the cards, which we have to supply to Linda Hill. They just got certification last Friday, so it's supposed to be in this week. And we would do the same thing as far as, there's nothing more, I guess, crucial for us. It's the number one, is making sure that it's a safe environment, and everybody would be, IDs would be checked both ahead of time, and people would wear a 21 bracelet, as well as the bartenders would also check to make sure that everybody has a bracelet, or if anything seems out of the ordinary.
I recall that it was, I think, at Chief Frederickson's suggestion that he didn't want the alcohol service close to the road. And it was
Correct, right.
resulted that it was moved back in March.
Correct, yes.
Anyone else? Well,
I see nothing in the package with regard to insurance.
Yes, so I have the insurance certificates just came in, so
Okay.
Linda said I would present those copies to you, which I do have today with me.
Okay.
And the other piece of information that I do owe you is the tip certification cards as well, which I assume that if anything is approved or not approved, it would be based on me supplying that to you.
Okay. How was, you have the insurance information?
Yes.
Available?
you have Yarmouth named as an additional insured.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here is my insurance and the town of Yarmouth certificate.
And the tip card you'll get to Linda.
Yeah, I have one now, but I'm just going to wait till I get the 4 others as well.
Will you have details at this event? A detail or, I know you had, I think, an ambulance at the last.
Yeah, so we actually had a pre-meeting last week with the town, which included the acting chief, and we will have 2 fire details, as well as work with the obviously the Yarmouth Police Force to have detailers there as well. So, and that worked out really well the last time, because we definitely need them because of the traffic that would be traveling on 28, just to make sure that it's obviously a safe environment, because people crossing over from Captain Parker's or culling into the driveway. The police were valuable, very valuable to us in the March event, just to make sure that that pattern flowed very safely.
And what was the end time of the Irish festivals? Was that 10 p.m. as well?
That one was 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little colder then.
Yeah.
It was definitely colder.
Wasn't cold inside the tent.
No. But we definitely learned a lot. The next year, not to put the cart before the horse, but we'd probably have that as like a 1-day event as opposed to a 2-day event. And, it got pretty expensive when you calculate tents and heaters and everything else that we needed logistically to make that happen. Mm-hmm. So we have to be a little wiser this time around if we plan on doing that again.
Okay. Mark, you have anything?
No questions, thank you.
What are our requirements, insurance requirements?
$1 million.
Okay. Do we have any, it's probably something for board consideration, with regard to what the levels of insurance should be depending on the attendance at an event?
I don't, I think it's just a standard on town property for a business enterprise.
Okay. I'm just thinking about it in areas where you've got large gatherings of people, acoustical equipment. I don't think, are there any covered areas that, under which people would be gathered?
So you said covered areas?
Covered areas, is it 40 by 80 tent?
Yeah, so the most part, it's an outdoor event, but we wanted to provide a 40 by 80 tent just for shade purposes, for like eating. We'll have tables and chairs there. Because we ranged that the demographic could go, anywhere from a child to 100. So the nice thing about the property is that it's all flat. It is, definitely wheelchair accessible. I think, it's good having, I think last year we had one person that twisted an ankle, but the fire department was right there to.
I'm going to be there for that.
Oh, that was you.
And so was Karen Green. We were both watching.
Yeah.
Like, oh.
Yeah, but that was the nice thing about having the fire department there. They were basically right, to assist.
To answer Norm's question, on the insurance limits, they have $1 million each occurrence and aggregate coverage of up to $5 million.
Okay.
So if one person, something happened, that person would be covered up to $1 million. Doesn't mean they get $1 million. Their claim might be worth $10,000, but it'd have to be pretty catastrophic. But if there were several people that got injured, there would be an aggregate of $5 million. Plus, there's $1 million in damage to the property. $5,000 for medical expenses for anybody that's injured. So it looks like pretty good coverage.
Yeah.
I just have a question, and this is probably not relative. Mark might know the answer to it. For crowd control requirements, I know inside a building it's, I think, over 100 people. Is that a requirement for an outdoor festival?
Not that I'm aware of.
Mark, if you could address
I'm
the
sorry.
crowd manager rules, anything for outdoor festivals in a tent?
I believe it's for over 100 people. You need to have one. Up to 200, you need two. That's not a requirement from the building department. It's a state.
State law.
It's a state law.
But does that pertain to outdoor open events as opposed to?
I'm not 100% certain. I thought it was for nightclubs and for bars and nightclubs,
For sure.
That's what I thought. It was for contained areas.
indoor
It's
areas.
something that's required by law that affect you. You may have to look into that.
Yeah, I mean, our goal, obviously, is, the challenge for us is that it's a year-one event, and we're taking educated guesses on how many people that we would have attending. But at the end of the day, our goal and our number one objective is safety. And you can trust, my word, that we would make sure that we wouldn't allow overcrowding. If we felt that if it was to that point, we would basically have to, shut it off. We feel like we could fit 2,500 people there comfortably. That's our educated guess, that we think we could potentially get.
I'm not sure that the outdoor venue triggers that requirement, but it is something that, as what I'm saying, is that you should look into if it is required.
Yeah, I
by
don't
law.
believe it does. I'll talk to Phil Magnuson about
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I'd definitely look it up and find out.
What, other than the increased parking, based on your experience with the March event, what other upgrades, if you will, do you need for this event other than the increased parking?
We pretty much threw everything out there for the March event. If anything, we're cutting back a little bit. We ended up taking a loss on the March event, but that was basically just pretty much over-preparing. So now we know, what to have, what not to have. Everything from, we had 2 extra generators that we didn't need, that type of thing. So we had extra tents that we didn't need as well. So everything kind of added up. But as far as preparation, we obviously have to prepare a lot because the land itself doesn't have a lot of amenities such as power, water, or any type of like a coverage type of thing. So those are things that really have to be brought in from another source.
Do you have any idea, even if it's an estimated figure, how many you had at the March event?
We feel like the number was in the 3,000 range.
Really, that many?
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously you've handled that.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously I think this is a little bit easier because with the hopefully better weather, last time it was a little bit more where we had to get more involvement from the town because of the laws providing to how many people can fit in the tent, those types of things. Our tent, we don't plan on using sides, so everything will be accessible. So it's not going to be closed or all. So, but obviously the March event was a little more, we had to watch that more closely because how many people are actually in the tent and what the exit patterns are as well.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
We have a motion to close the public portion of the hearing. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed?
Make a motion to approve the application as presented.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
I just have one more question
Sure.
on the insurance. Do you conduct concerts elsewhere, Mr. McDonough?
Yes, so I have two other events that I run. I run a South Shore Irish Festival at the Marshfield Fairgrounds, and then I run a country festival at the Marshfield Fairgrounds as well, both events in September.
Okay. And, are the preparations and, in particular, the insurance consistent for this event with what you do elsewhere?
Yes, yeah, 100%. I go with the 1 million policy and the 5 million aggregate. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's, I read, there was actually a document that Linda Hill supplied me, and that was what I read in the document, and that's why I followed that rule.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Concludes the licensing matters, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we'll move on to the tax rate reclassification hearing. Good evening, Andy.
Good evening. My name is Andy Machado. I'm the Director of Assessing for the Town of Yarmouth. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Board of Assessors who were unable to be here this evening and to thank them publicly for the experience and guidance that they've provided me throughout the year. They are Mr. Joseph Sullivan, the Chairman, Dr. John Sarajan, and Ms. Stephanie Miller. I'd like to thank you all. I truly appreciate the job you do. Just a quick side note, Joe Sullivan will now become the second member of the Yarmouth Elderly Disabled Tax Relief Committee, which was approved at the May annual town meeting. The Selectmen, the chairman of the Board of Assessors serves on that committee. So he would now be the second member in addition to Collector Treasurer Sue Ripley. And then it will be up to the board to appoint the remaining 3 members.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I think we have to open the hearing.
You're right. Thank you. All right, let me read the legal notice of the hearing. Thank you, Andy, for starting us off. Under Chapter 40, Section 56, as amended by Chapter 369 of the Acts of 1982 and Chapter 79 of the Acts of 1983, the Town of Yarmouth Board of Selectmen will conduct a public hearing on whether the Town of Yarmouth should implement the Classification Act. Said hearing will be conducted on Tuesday, July 10th, 2018, 6 p.m. at Town Hall, 1146 Route 28, South Yarmouth, Mass. 02664. At the hearing, the Board of Selectmen will hear testimony as to what will be the residential factor, which will determine the share of taxes each classification of property will pay, what will be open face factor, and whether to adopt a residential or small commercial exemption. Per order of the Town of Yarmouth Board of Selectmen. All right, thank you, Andy.
The reason that we're here this evening is that we are currently in the process of setting the tax rate, which we'll be doing around this time each year in order to send the first half tax bill around mid to late August. After the budgeting process and town meeting take place, the next step in the process is for the assessors to determine, through real estate market activities, what the value of all property in the town should be. Once the values are computed, they're reviewed by the Department of Revenue for approval and certification. Our values have been submitted, and approval was received recently, which brings us to why we're here this evening. Towns that are certified by the Department of Revenue as assessing at full and fair cash value must decide whether or not to tax all classes of property at the same rate, which is commonly referred to as adopting a factor of 1, or to shift the burden among the major property classes. You, as our local officials, have the option of shifting the tax burden to the commercial, industrial, and personal property classes anywhere from 1 to 50%. This would create two different tax rates, one for the residential class of properties and one for the commercial class of properties. And you have a graphic that illustrates that in your packet. In conclusion, I will tell you that to date, the Town of Yarmouth's policy has been to select a factor of 1. And also, the Board of Assessors voted at their May 3rd, 2018 meeting to recommend to the Board of Selectmen a factor of 1 and to reject the residential and small commercial exemptions. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Start with Eric.
I don't, this is housekeeping as far as I'm concerned, so I don't have any questions. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, that's the only thing, I don't have, we don't have previous year comparisons, so it looks like we're still at possibly a 5% commercial rate. Is that where we're at now, based on this that you gave us?
Well, it's because it's commercial, industrial, personal property, it's just about 10%, a little less than 10%.
10, so we're increasing slightly then.
Very slightly, 9.7 to maybe 9.8.
Okay. You see any trends, anything that we should be concerned about in terms of the overall reevaluations and the assessments?
No, we this year we're looking at about a 6% increase in residential properties. So I think that most taxpayers would think that's a good thing.
So 6%, and so the change here is a negative 183. Is that to the average homeowner? Is that, I'm trying to figure out what this would be if there was a shift?
What that shows you is if you do shift the burden to the
That would be the
commercial
change.
industrial,
Yep.
the residential taxpayer would save $183, and the commercial taxpayer would be paying $1,100 more, I think it is.
Okay, so the residential is 90%, commercial is 6.85, and personal properties 2, so it's not a total of 10 for commercial yet. So it's not-
It's just under 10, commercial, industrial, personal property.
Together.
So it's 9.8, something to that effect.
Okay, we need to increase that. Thank you.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah. I would be opposed to changing our past practice. I think businesses down here have a difficult enough time without putting more taxes on them, and they're the engine that drives the economy. Most of the revenue's coming from the residential base anyway, and as you said, that's increasing. So in addition, I don't see any need for it. I would be, after you go to Mark, I'd be prepared to make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mark?
Do we need to close the public hearing?
We haven't
We
had
will.
public comment.
We're going to you first next.
The only question that I have, Andy, is have there been requests in the past to shift or make any adjustment at all? In my recollection, Joe, over the
To my
past several
knowledge.
years, it's been pretty much the same policy of the board and the Board of Assessors to to pretty much stay on this path.
I've been here for 3 years. That has been the case, and my understanding is from my predecessor, who was here for 32 years, that was the case during his tenure as well.
So to the best of your knowledge, there's really been no request
No.
from within the community to perhaps consider making a change or a shift? Thank you.
Okay, I do have a question about, this shift is a shift between commercial and residential.
Correct.
That you've demonstrated. Is there, what would be the impact of a residential exemption?
Again, that would depend upon, the residential exemption is a value-based exemption. So in other words, you would take the average and residential value, and depending upon what percentage you chose, you would get that percentage off of your valuation. So in essence, it changes the tax rate. So non-residents would pay more, obviously. Theoretically, residents would pay less. However, because it's a value-based exemption and it changes the rate, there is a break-even point where even if you're a resident, at some point, some of the higher-priced homes, even though you're a resident, you'll actually pay more by adopting a residential exemption.
What are some of the issues to be considered? And you know, there are other communities on the Cape that use a residential exemption for some purpose?
There are 15 communities in the state
In the state?
that have adopted
Okay.
residential exemption. Of those 15 states, their average residential tax bill is roughly $6,400. Town of Yarmouth's average residential tax bill is about half that. So my assumption would be that that's the reason that they have chosen to use the residential exemption.
Okay. What are they trying to achieve in that? You know, I guess
I
I
have
don't
no
know what the
idea.
arguments are.
Yeah, I have no idea what they're trying to achieve. I'm assuming they're trying to give their residents a tax break because their residential average is so high.
Okay. You know, I guess we've employed certain techniques to try to reduce the burden of taxes for some of the elderly taxpayers whose income levels are below certain specified levels. Is this technique of any benefit in that regard? Or would it be of any benefit in that regard? Because I know we have a fairly limited impact from the residential or the adjustment to senior tax rates.
I'm not sure that I understand the question. I think that the residential exemption, and again, it really depends upon the value of your property. In this exercise, about $500,000 roughly is the break-even point. If you have a house assessed at $500,000, even as a resident, you're actually going to pay more in taxes because it's a it's a value-based exemption, which changes the tax rate.
Do we have any way of knowing what the of the household residential households versus total households, taxable households in the town? How many of those residential households are seniors with lower income capabilities? Do we have any way of knowing that?
We do. In fact, when we've done the analysis for the residential exemptions, we did do that analysis. I don't have it with me. I couldn't quote it right now as to what it was.
Okay. You know, you know, I guess I've heard the statistic, I don't know if it's true or not, that 40% of our community is seniors. I don't know if that's a statewide statistic or a statistic relative to Yarmouth. If 40% of our residents are seniors, then you know, I'm trying to think what the the total would be of the total taxable property values and what the benefit to those seniors might be of a residential exemption.
Well, I think, and again, I'm just spitballing here because I have no idea, but I don't think that, I don't know where the 40% came from.
Okay.
I don't think it's anywhere even close to that, because I think you have to remember that we're talking about property owners versus residents. So, and I think when we did the analysis, what we found was there may be more elderly residents, but they're not all necessarily homeowners and taxpayers.
Okay.
Wouldn't you say, though, Andy, to that regard, what we've done for the exemption for those older population with the high needs has been probably as aggressive as we've been able to be, and if we had that type of break, it probably wouldn't benefit them more than the steps we've already taken. Would you be able to get those benefits plus the exemption? Could you do both?
Absolutely.
You could. And have we reached more people? I know that you were working on...
We have. We had an increase in the exemptions of about 5% or so this past year. And I think a lot of that is due to the outreach that we've done, which actually reminds me that we had 6 workshops scheduled for this year. We've already had 2 of them, and we urge anyone that is applying for the senior exemption to try to attend one of these workshops. The next one actually is tomorrow in Town Hall. They're all held right here in this hearing room. Wednesday, July 11th from 1 to 3, Thursday, July 12th from 1 to 3, Monday, July 16th from 10 to 12, and Wednesday, July 18th from 10 to 12. And we've already had 2.
And have you worked with the senior center for those who maybe are homebound?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
What I love most about that is really it's getting to the people who are in the most need. So I think that that's really important.
Yeah, and we work with them regularly, and Kathy Bailey and Hilda Davenport and Linda Colby actually is a social worker that does actually do the home visits, where she will go out for people that are homebound, and she actually helps them through their application process.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions from the board? Do we have a motion to close the hearing?
Go to the public.
So moved.
Can't have a
Do you have any public comments on this matter? Yes, Vita?
I have a question. Did I miss what is the tax rate for FY19?
The proposed tax rate is $10.10.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions from the public? Okay, do we have a motion?
A motion to
hearing.
close the public portion of the hearing.
Second?
Second.
Okay, those in favor, any further
Aye.
comments from the board? Okay, those in favor of closing the hearing, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have a motion concerning the tax rate.
I move, Mr. Chairman, that the town of Yarmouth continue to tax all classes at the same rate by adopting a factor of 1, and to reject the residential exemption and the small commercial exemption.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Mr. Chairman,
Hey.
I further move to authorize use of a signature stamp for the tax rate forms and authorize the town administrator to sign for the Board of Selectmen electronically.
Second.
Okay, discussion on the board? All right, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
And I thank you for that. And we actually have these forms right here, and if we could, we'd like you to sign them right now, because we're actually going up to submit them to the Department of Revenue
We
right
know Ed
now.
wants to be the first one. Maybe.
2 years in a row.
That'd be great.
That's the authorization,
Yeah.
and this is the actual L5.
We're down in the bottom.
sign the blank space.
Thank you.
There's one more coming.
Dan has it, yeah.
Sign just in the blank space.
Where do you want me to sign?
Just in the blank space.
Right up in here?
Yeah, there's fine.
Just can sign up above, right above my name.
Sign anywhere?
I think so.
Getting smaller and smaller.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Andy, and thank you. As usual, you came well prepared. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the discussion of the wastewater agreement, update and discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your packet is a memorandum that was generated by Dave Young from CDM Smith relative to the next steps in the DHY Clean Waters Community Partnership. This memorandum went to Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth. Mr. Young is here today to assist us in this next effort. What we're here to present to you is the first draft of legislation that, if adopted by the board at a future meeting, which is scheduled for later this month, all boards would have to approve. That would allow the state representative to file on our behalf this legislation that would establish the wastewater district. It does not preclude us from having further discussion as to what the details of the district are. That is to come at later date with a working group to discuss those details. It just empowers the state law, the legislature to act on the state law that gets basically the table set. It's analogous to establishing a regional school district, if you will, and the school agreement is coming later, and that's a document that has the details in it. I would say that we are trying to align with the House of Representatives Legal Counsel, some additional formatting for this document that will allow House Counsel to sign off on it. There's a filing deadline, I believe, of July 31 to get it into this legislative session. So the presentation tonight is to answer any questions you might have. There's also on page 2 of the memorandum what the upcoming schedule for the partnership group looks like. And the idea behind this would be that if we stay on track, the legislature will eventually take some kind of vote to hopefully to empower this, and then we would be on track for a potential town meeting next year to have the agreement paperwork or details finalized. So if you have any questions, this is similar language, I believe, that we have discussed in the past that talked about modeling after the Mansfield, Norton, and Foxborough district. And like I said, this is there's likely to be some minor edits that come on the July 24th meeting version, but this is the heart of the document right here in front of you tonight.
Has town council reviewed this?
Yes.
Were there any comments?
Just a minor text grammatical comment. In Kopelman and Page is town council for Harwich and Dennis, and they have done the lion's share of the work related to this on taking review of that. This is a document generated to us by Dave. Almost essentially the heart of it is from the Mansfield, Norton, Foxborough document. So the House of Representatives is familiar with this concept. The House Counsel, I think, has changed, though, since it was introduced into the House in a prior session. But this is not a newly created document by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of lawyers have looked at this along the way.
Okay, questions?
Is he going to give us a presentation?
If town council has reviewed it, and sounds like a lot of lawyers have had a lot of eyeballs on it, so who am I to have any
I guess
questions?
my question about it relates to section 5 there at the, well, I should say, section 4, and then number 5 about incurring debt. I'm interested in how that process works very specifically in terms of mechanisms, calling for votes, town meeting, regional votes.
Kind of just like the DY school agreement.
I don't think so.
Dave, you want to step up to the microphone, and you've got the most experience in this particular.
They will tell us how much we have to pay.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. David Young with CDM Smith. Stan, I'll get to your question in a minute, Selectman Post. The memo, it's really just laid out the 4 steps in the process should this ultimately come to fruition. You took the first step this past May in passing your town meeting article unanimously to authorize you as the selectman to file for special legislation. So we're really here to talk about that second step, but we wanted to lay out all 4 steps so that you understood where we were in the timeline and how the process plays out. As Dan indicated, this is modeled after the MFN Regional Wastewater District, meaning Mansfield, Foxborough, and Norton, which came into existence in 2014, to give you a time frame for that. So the second step is to generate the special legislation. Again, this is modeled around the exact special legislation that was looked at by 4 different law firms at that time, and then worked with the Legislative Council to do that wording. This has been watered down a little bit more than that one in that we took out the number of commissioners and said that that would be detailed in the agreement. So we pushed some things to step 3. But other than that, what this really does is just allow you to create a community partnership or a district. The 2 words are used synonymously in that language, and that's in part because the Mass General Law that's being adopted uses the word district. We're using the words community partnership. But that's really the only difference. And those items, which I'll talk to item 5 in a moment, all of those 12 items are specifically from that MFN special legislation, as we modeled the wording at the town meeting article off of the MFN town meeting articles. As Dan indicated, Copeland and Page has gone through. They made sure that the current Mass General Law references and wording and all that is correct. And they even acknowledged that since the Legislative Council had reviewed it previously, that they weren't going to get into, doing a lot of changes to it either. And I believe your counsel, Jay Tollerman, has made a couple of minor edits to it as well. So we're in the process of putting all that together. We'll send that back out to you. But nothing has been filed yet. We've had correspondence with the state reps and senators so they know it's coming, should you authorize it to be filed. If it's filed by July 31st of this session, then even though the legislature theoretically goes out of session at the end of July, they still meet every 48 hours by legislative law, and so that they can act on it where it's been acted on previously for Mansfield, Foxborough, and Norton. There isn't perceived to be any debate over the article, so it should be straightforward in that regard. But you need to do this process if you want to create the partnership by Mass General Law to give you those legislative powers under the laws being adopted. Step 3, which has been ongoing since you formed the subgroup in 2017, and we've been continuing to meet monthly, is to actually work out the details, and that's the agreement itself. That's where you would get into the governance structure, who pays for what, how it's paid, how frequently it's paid, all those items. So that's being worked upon in the subgroup meetings now. There's been a rough draft of even that put together, but a long way to go. And then the fourth step, which I think has been, everybody has agreed, has been critical in all three towns, is that should there be a recommendation from the local community to move forward with this process, that you would put a town meeting article on your annual town meeting next May is the proposed schedule. And you would need a town meeting approval for this process from each of the participating communities in order for it to become fully enacted. So those are the four steps where we are today. There is a timeline on the back page, and that's in order to meet the grant schedule. You did get a efficiency and regionalization grant of $100,000 for this process. You got another grant, actually, for discussions that are ongoing between Yarmouth and Barnstable, and we've started that process a little over a month ago. But the grant has to be expended by next June, so that's in keeping with the schedule that was put forth. Specific to, was it item 5?
Yeah, no, it was actually section 4, subgroup 5 there, under section 4, in terms of bonding.
Okay.
Yes, I'm
Well, the way this partnership would work is essentially it would be a separate entity that has its own bonding authority. So that takes it off your Prop 2.5 tax rolls. It has the ability to go out and bond to build the treatment plant, to build the effluent recharge sites. And the way this structure was set up, and you may recall there was a discussion back during the discussion of whether to put the town meeting article forward over the different types of governance structures that were being looked at. And this one allowed for that partnership if one of the communities fell behind or chose not to make their payment, because it would be 3 customers to this entity, being Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth. If one of them chose not to pay their bill, that they can take the money from the cherry sheets and collect that directly. So this organization and adoption of these Mass General laws allows for that, which is really required for allowing them to go out on the bond market, so that they know that they will be paid having only 3 customers. Does that answer the question?
unfortunately. I'm just trying to play scenarios out in my head, and I'm thinking about the specific process. So they come, they don't have to come to us at all, they give us a bill. There's no, you said they're exempt from Proposition 2.5? So
no, they would take this off your Prop 2, yes, well, yes, but they would take that off your Prop 2.5 tax rolls as well. So, for instance, if they go out and bond the treatment plant, you're not having to go out and bond the treatment plant.
in terms
Your
of
ratepayers or however you're choosing to collect your revenues to make that payment to that bill would be up to you. And you would still have the vast majority of your wastewater system, because you would still be in charge of everything locally
that'll
in the
be a
town.
portion of it, but in terms of it getting taxed to the end taxpayer, there's no, are you telling me there's no Proposition 2.5 for regular operating? I mean, they can just send the bill and,
Its own taxing entity, isn't
I
it?
know, but even the school is its own
Well,
taxing
if I
entity.
may, so the way this would operate, it's going to be a little bit tenuous in the beginning because there's no payers into the system. So during this construction phase, while it's getting up and running, we have to come up with a decision. So there are going to be commissioners that have to be decided upon by each town. The number of commissioners and what representation looks like, that's for further discussion, which will come back to the group, the board here, and each subgroup that's been appointed will go to their own boards to talk about that. We hope to strike a deal. So governance of the entity, you'll be represented, this town, by some number of future decided commission members. That being said, when this gets up and running, the theory behind these entities is that they exist on ratepayers. So you pay into it based on what the cost of the carrying cost of the structure is. But to get to that point, like I know Harwich is at that point now with Chatham, they have to find other means, and they've gone to town meeting and authorized debt exclusion, I believe, is their vehicle.
Yeah, until they, as you indicated, until you get up and running and you actually have ratepayers connected to the system, you don't have people who are paying per se under most rate structures. So typically, the town meeting has supported those initial payments, or at least a portion of that, until you get enough ratepayers up using the system.
Who calls the town meeting? Is it the commissioners that call the town meeting? Is it through
No, all the partnership actions would be just by votes of the commissioners. There's no town meeting required for any of their actions once they're formed.
Okay, so we get a bill. The taxpayers get a bill. And who decides how that's paid for, whether it's by Proposition 2.5, whether it's by a debt exemption?
You as sewer commissioners.
And then we can make a decision whether or not we need to call a town meeting or a vote. And if the vote fails, what you're saying is the bill still has to be paid, just like in the district.
Yes. Similar to if the town of Yarmouth went out for a bond, you need to make sure you have a mechanism to pay that bond.
Understood.
That's why that's in there for the district.
So a complicating factor to this is that within the Yarmouth town limit lines, there's this collection system that's going to need to be built out and paid for. That's separate than, this is the plant and the effluent recharge. And in that particular case, as we're presently constructed, the 5 members of the board are the sewer commissioners. So there's a whole nother cost associated with the collection system that has to be looked at as well and balanced with the cost of developing the treatment plant. So it will get a little complicated for sure.
So how does the Mansfield-Norton group, in the specific details of their agreement, work on how they manage that with the specific town partners? Because, we have a 10-year capital plan. We have a lot of other items. So how does it work up there? Is there specific language that talks about how they must communicate to the boards?
Yes, and that's all laid out in the agreement. They actually have to specific hard dates that they have to submit their draft budget, final budgets to the 3 communities, so the communities all know when that's coming to them. They're doing budget projections. They do 5-year plans. All that is laid out in the agreement. Yeah. There's a lot of communication between that district and the 3 towns that make that up. And the commissioners there, some are, residents, and some are selectmen, some are water and sewer commissioners.
Dave, in terms of the composition of the board, I noticed this draft agreement says that the number will be set in the future by the respective boards of selectmen. How do they do it up there? Is there equal representation in terms of the number of commissions for each town, or do they have some other way of getting proportionate representation?
Up there, they did it essentially based on percent flow ownership. So they have 7 commissioners. Mansfield has the largest flow ownership. They have 3 members. The other 2 communities have 2 for a 7-member commission. And the agreement lays out, you need supermajority votes for certain financial items. You need a positive vote from communities that are impacted by that. So there's a lot of those things that have been thought out as to, to make sure fairness and transparency are put forth and documented in the agreement.
Is there any cap on the typical operating budget in terms of percentages? Or, I know in my mind, I'm thinking big ticket capital investment, but just the O&M of the plan. How does that work in the budget process?
In the agreement, they have actually specifically laid out certain percentages that they can hold for retained earnings. Otherwise, they have to, anything above that, they have to give back to the communities in the following year budget. So it's not like they can just go build up this huge bank account at the expense of their customers.
You know what that cap is? Unretained earnings?
I would have to go back and look.
What was it?
I think it's,
20%.
20?
I was going to say 20, but yeah,
Yeah, I think it's got to have operating capital. How does it get that?
right.
I mean, how does it get that to start?
Well, it comes in, the communities, I believe, pay the district on a quarterly basis. So it's important that they make their payments so that the district doesn't have to go out and short-term borrow, that they have that cash flow.
One of the areas that have been part of the discussions to date is the concern about creating a new government entity with all the costs associated with that. And then what's attractive on the model they use up there is there's the financial transactional piece in delivery of the bills and whatnot is subcontracted, is that fair to say, to the town of Mansfield? So
Yeah,
they don't have to have their own infrastructure for all that?
Right. What Dan's saying is, instead of the district, again, the executive director is actually the Mansfield DPW director, so they pay a certain portion of his salary on an annual basis, but they didn't go hire a separate person full-time. Same with all the processing of bills and invoices and all those things. They contract services from the town of Mansfield, and town of Mansfield is just reimbursed for those services, portions of salary for those folks.
I noticed, though, Dave, in the agreement that the treasurer's position is separate from the 3 towns.
Yeah, that was a recommendation from the accounting firms.
That's important. That's a good practice.
Yeah.
Is there a cap on administrative costs allowed?
Not specifically called out in that agreement, but, you know, the difference there, they had a treatment plant that they were already up and running, was up and running. It was supposed to be a 3-town plant 25 years ago. Town of Mansfield went ahead, ended up having 2 customers along the way, Foxborough and Norton. So when they went to do the treatment plant expansion, everybody needed more capacity. They chose to go this route so that all 3 towns would have a say in overseeing the operations of the plant, and so that they could go back to all their customers and say, you know, this transparency is working, and this is how things are being done, and it's being governed, so.
Is it fair to say these are all governance questions, and we're going to see that in November? We're here to talk about the legislation that's in front of us?
Yeah.
I thought so.
How does this agreement get amended?
Are you talking the special legislation or the agreement itself?
Well, this creates quite a few specific provisions. For example, in Section 8, it talks about allocation of costs. It says each of the member towns shall pay its share of such costs, whatever those are. It's not defined.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess a definition would be appropriate. Upon receipt by the treasurer of the town of the certification of the costs allocated to that town under the agreement by the district treasurer, and it goes on to say that I think that the costs will be allocated based on flow capacity. So
you're in the agreement?
Excuse me?
You're reading from the agreement or from the special legislation?
Section 8?
Of the agreement.
Legislation, I think.
Yeah, so that's getting into the details of how the community partnership would actually operate. And those, to answer your question, the vote of the commissioners can change that agreement. But the special legislation just says that those things would be put into the agreement, which is still being formulated.
I don't have the agreement here. We have the,
Yes,
this is
I'm
what we're talking about, right? The
confused.
Yeah,
legislation.
the draft legislation.
Okay.
That's only enabling legislation. That only authorizes the 3 towns.
The special legislation,
district,
yes,
And then the agreements will be hammered out after.
yes, yes.
That was the intended idea, was we knew that that was a complicated aspect. So the agreement, we were holding those details to hammer out with the group as part of the agreement that would be attached to the legislation at a later date.
Yeah, and we will be coming back and having a lot more discussion over the whole governance and all those things with you.
Well, is this document becoming part of the legislation?
That is the legislation.
That is the bill.
Legislation.
That is the bill.
Okay, so Section 8 at this stage talks about how costs are going to be allocated, whatever those costs are.
Whatever those, yeah, so whatever the costs are, how they actually specifically get allocated, so right now, we're not at the point, we've talked about it, but, like in the case of Mansfield, Norton, and Foxborough, they use a percentage of the plant capacity for future capacity.
Yes, all the costs are clearly defined in, again, the agreement, not the special legislation. Fixed costs, what are those? Flow variable cost and other variable costs, and how those are all paid for or allocated out to the communities are all laid out in detail in the agreement.
But these
The
are-
special
this
legislation is
allows-
just going to say you're going to negotiate an agreement, and that agreement will have to come back to
Well-
you and town meeting.
Technically, these are this legislation allows for that allocation to happen. So to me, it's important that the legislation is right, because this is what triggers the agreement.
The legislation allows for the allocation based on flow capacity.
Right.
Then it says, as further detailed in the agreement.
Right.
And that's going to be the subject
Right.
of negotiation. If you don't agree to it, and things get thorny enough, you'll walk away from the agreement.
Right.
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 Well, yeah, so I don't understand, this is talking about capacity, not upon actual flow.
No, so that's a really great point. So the plant will be built to a certain millions per gallons per day treatment. And if that's the case, each town has a supposed amount of treatment that it wants to treat today.
Correct.
Then there's the amount that you would want to treat foreseeable into the future. What that looks like is what becomes the allocated capacity, if you will. You're actually
Correct.
buying into the future capacity of the plant as much as the actual flows. So I think if I could oversimplify this, it's almost like it's a two-tier payment system. You've got the cost to build out a big plant, and then there's the ratepayers will be paying based on what they actually send there. But we're buying a future capacity, and we may not use it all for eons, for a very long time.
Well, that gets back to my question about there is no definition of cost.
Yeah, so the cost would be something as to, in the agreement, what constitutes those costs?
There'll probably be a
Operating costs,
definition.
And it's
capital.
But it's saying that those costs will be allocated based on capacity. Is the agreement between the towns going to contradict that?
That agreement will be what governs, and that will detail and specify fixed costs, variable costs, flow variable costs, all those, and they all get paid a little bit differently. And that's what will govern, and that's why it references or is detailed in the agreement.
Okay, I don't know why we have to say allocation of flow capacity. Each member's share of towns, share of the cost shall be based on the cost allocation detailed in the agreement, would be the way I would see that being worded. Because the agreement defines, number one, what are the actual costs, and are they fixed, are they variable, are they, and so forth, and then defines how they're to be allocated. So I don't know why there would be a specific reference to allocation of flow capacity in this particular document.
You could probably answer that by adding and/or as further detailed in the agreement to be further worked on. I think there's a certain amount of language that House Counsel wants to see in there. but we can, when
Yeah, we can ask that question.
ask that question with that note in mind, but I think by adding the phrase "and/or as further detailed in the agreement,"
That would certainly cover it.
yeah.
Well, you know, I guess, Dan, I'm thinking about our regional agreement.
Oh, understood.
For the,
Yeah.
for the school district.
Yeah.
Everything is defined in our agreement that created the district
Right,
and defined how the costs were to be allocated.
that's right.
In this particular case, it appears to be different. We've got some indication of an allocation of cost in this agreement, which is the governing agreement for the sewer district.
Yeah, so let me give you a little background. So in the going back and forth with House Counsel we've had to date, we extracted a few things out of this agreement that they may not necessarily be comfortable with based on the Mass General Law reading. So this could be an item where they want to see at least some minimum standard of how allocation may occur. But like I said, I believe we can get to the same endpoint by adding "and/or as further detailed in the agreement." There's the one sticky issue that I know we're gonna have with House Counsel, because they've already opined on it, was how come there's no mention of the number of commissioners in the document? Frankly, we're not even close to having that final conclusion yet. So because we wanna meet the July 31 filing deadline, we're gonna try to convince House Counsel that even though they would like to see those some very specific terminology in the document, so it's memorialized in legislation, we're gonna do it through an agreement path. So we're only the second entity to do this, so there's not a lot of track record on it. So we'll report back to you on our findings on that, but that's a note well taken.
Are the commissioners, the number of commissioners, are they defined in this?
No.
No, we revised that from the MFN agreement, and I think it's Section 3B.
Okay.
The number of commissioners representing each town shall be as defined in the agreement. The commission members shall be appointed by the local board having the authority of sewer commissioners.
My thought is House Counsel looked at the last MFN agreement, they saw the number of commissioners in there and wondered why ours didn't have that. That's more than likely where that,
Because the three towns there had already agreed up front it was going to be based on flow allocation, so.
But when they did their legislation, Mansfield already had a plant in place.
Correct.
So the infrastructure was there, and it's a little bit different.
And they owned the plant at the time, so they were opening up their
A little
plant.
more speculative
No
as to how
question.
we want to organize.
absolutely. We're in a much different scenario, correct? We're trying to adopt a general law that was passed on a very known asset, plant expansion. This is significantly different. So we got to convince House Counsel that the agreement will have those legal documents or legal language in there to cover it. Just give us enough for the legislation to enact.
Okay. I'm trying to think of, all right, so this does not define the number of commissioners, and that will be in the
Or how they
agreement
get
between the
defined.
communities.
Yeah.
That's under Section 3B, Norm, 3 subset,
Okay.
page 1. Says number of commissioners representing each town
So-
shall be as defined in the agreement.
So getting back to my previous question about the amendment of this agreement, you said that it would be a matter for the commissioners to decide.
I misspoke. I thought you were talking the agreement. If you're talking amendment, the special legislation, you have to go back to the legislature.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you amend the agreement, and that's why the details, and you try to push as much to the agreement as you can, that can be amended by the commissioners.
But I think Dan's suggestion is a good one, and I think it takes us out of any potential problem area by having that and/or language inserted
Yeah, yeah.
on page 4. After overall allocation of flow capacity and/or as further detailed in the agreement, then you can reject flow capacity altogether and go with something else if you wish, assuming the other two towns agree with you.
Right, right.
But,
Okay.
but you raise a good question, and Dave gave a good answer. In terms of the general governing language of this special legislation, which is called enabling legislation. It enables you to legally form this district. Any hard and fast provisions of this legislation would have to be amended through the legislature.
Yes, for instance, Section 12, which allows you to, should a community so choose to adopt, to do connection fees. It was pretty well accepted on water systems, but there was some case law that questioned it on wastewater systems. So MFN actually went back and had that section added to its special legislation to clear that up. So in this draft, we incorporated that right from day one.
Okay. Going back to the original projections, I think you presented some months ago, you talked about the savings to each of the communities that would be partners in the district. Do you have that information available that you can share with us?
It's in the process of all being updated. In part, we're updating all the costs, and we're going to project them ahead to midpoint construction of what would be a first phase, so that you'd actually have actual numbers instead of numbers that are 3 or 4 years old. But two, some of the flows are changing too. Dennis, after doing their economic study that you're in the process of doing as well now, they have elected to increase the flow that they wanted to plan for. So we're updating those costs for them as we speak. And your flows may go down depending on the discussions with Barnstable, because you may send some flow to Barnstable instead of to the DHY Community Partnership.
Right.
So there's a lot of variables in play, so we don't have those numbers now, but we will be working on them, and we'll have them this fall.
Dave, to follow up on that, the calculations, like with the Parkers River Bridge replacement, that changes the cost calculation equation, because that took down the nitrogen load significantly. So a question that came up to me today was, what impact, if any, would some kind of level of dredging do in Lewis Bay to reduce the overall cost or burden of this too? And that's obviously an answer I don't know.
DEP does not accept dredging as a long-term solution.
So even if you were to get significantly better flowage through Lewis Bay, and that demonstrated a quicker evacuation,
Because the theory is that it's going to
okay.
silt back in, yes.
But Parkers River is a significant one.
So it's okay to widen bridges, but...
Well, theoretically, that flow is going to always be increased, and you're going to have better flushing permanently.
Yeah,
You're not
right,
having to go back and dig out what's silted in.
Yeah, okay. All right, that makes sense.
And we haven't decided, we're not at that point with Barnstable, as to what the boundaries would even look like on that end of town. So that, you know, there's some degree of flexibility with these numbers for sure.
And we'll need to have a, try to get a better understanding of your phasing program too, as to which areas you want to target in your first 2, 3, 4 phases. As you may recall, originally you had an 8-phase program. You know, my guess is from last discussions that your phases are going to change. We even dropped out some areas as of 9 months, 10 months ago. Whether that's going to still happen or not still needs to be decided. So when you get your committee up and running again, we'll need to have those discussions with them, as well as input from you folks. Similarly, we had a meeting with the folks from MassDOT, Mass Department of Transportation, on the Route 28 projects. And they have some Route 28 projects that are starting next year, which if you dovetail in and can get in line with some of their projects and incorporate it into their project, they'll pay a good share of what you would pay if you did it on your own. They have a project starting over in Barnstable, on Yarmouth Road, 28 coming this way. Then there's another one. So there's like 8 projects lined up from Barnstable all the way up to Harwich. And we now have a timeline of those that the goal would be to try to dovetail in Barnstable, Yarmouth, Dennis, Harwich projects to save the community's money because MassDOT's going ahead with them anyway.
Okay.
So there's a lot of those discussions that impact those cost factors.
Okay. Will you be making a presentation of those revised numbers to our board?
We'd be happy to do that when we get them, probably sometime this fall, yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see what happens with regard to the overall costs under a couple different scenarios, and depending on our allocation or potential allocation to Barnstable, and also if the overall cost allocation of the central plant changes as a result of the economic projections being done. Originally, I think, I don't recall the dollars of savings that were projected. Was it, I thought it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 million for Yarmouth, 35 million for Dennis. Was that those numbers?
It sounds a little too high for Dennis, but part of the reason why Yarmouth is lower in that savings for the district or the community partnership is because you have a bigger proportion of your cost in your collection system.
Mm-hmm.
So the Harwich and Dennis collection system costs are actually very similar. Yours is much bigger because you have a bigger area. It's, you know, strictly full proportional, but the savings at the treatment plant is still beneficial to have a single plant versus 3 plants. The beauty of now you having discussions with Barnstable is the most costly portion of your collection system to send to Dennis is the Barnstable side. So that's why we're seriously looking at that and trying to save costs. Plus, if the partnership comes about, theoretically you won't need your Buck Island Road effluent recharge site, so that becomes an asset for you to use with your negotiations with Barnstable, because that's closest to Barnstable.
Okay.
I just have one more question.
Sure.
On Section 12, this partnership is it envisioned to form into something other than a treatment plant? I guess my question is, it says the sewer connection charges, assessment, betterments, or privilege fees may include the town's portion. I'm wondering why that terminology's in there, because that wouldn't be within this partnership's authority to assess betterments, would it?
No, they're actually just going to issue 3 bills. They do have eminent domain authority, the way this is worded, though, under those Mass General laws. So if they needed to, you know, procure land for a common pumping station, such as envision that the partnership would begin through common ownership of a pumping station that would be located at Route 134 and Route 28 in Dennis. Then the pipes that lead from that pumping station up to the treatment plant, which is up near the Dennis DPW. And then the pipelines that would leave that and go to the effluent recharge sites in the 3 towns. That's what the partnership would own and operate, excuse me. And that's based on the current layout. Because of the gas company putting some pipes in and this and that, we're actually looking at some different routes now. High Bank Road got pretty crowded in the last year. And we're looking at some ways to save money still for each of the towns. So some of those routes may change, and whether that common pumping station occurs and comes about, we're not sure yet. But so that's the way the system is envisioned. So it's more than just a treatment plant.
So, but who in any case would be assessed a betterment? Give me an example of why that's in there. Just.
Actually, I think that that provides the towns with the ability to do that in this special legislation. It may not relate exactly to the community partnership. So this was added in to provide, and it reads the towns. It doesn't refer to the community partnership or the district.
No, that's the way I'm reading it. It says the town, in the first sentence, it says the towns of Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth each acting individually through their municipal board.
So it got incorporated into a district special legislation, but it gave you and clarified what you could potentially use, should you choose to use that method.
And it says further, not acting in concert through the district.
So, but
Right.
typically when you think about betterments, it's to specific homeowners for a connection. But you're saying that, so for a capital expenditure, whatever, we could assess overall a betterment instead of a tax? Is that?
Yeah, the way this came about is often what happens is, say you went and you put a sewer down a street and you paid for it, the homeowners along there paid for it, or whatever method you used. 10 years later, somebody comes back and buys a parcel, and instead of a T-shirt shop, they want to turn it into a restaurant. Well, they only paid for it as a T-shirt shop as to what, you know, if you were paying on a flow basis or a pipe size, if you did betterments or whatever it may be, and now they want to use a lot more water and discharge it into your sewer system. Should they be charged more? This would allow you to put on a connection fee to collect more money at that point later in the future, because otherwise it's already been paid off. And water departments have been doing that for years. You know, instead of the 5/8" typical connection that they would have had, suddenly they need, you know, a 3" diameter pipe. The water department will pay them on a much larger, they'll collect that fee for the larger water use. So this allows you to now do it on the wastewater side, if you want to enact that.
Okay, other questions? What do we,
So no vote tonight. We'll have the final version that has gone through House Council to present to you at the last meeting in July. I think it's July 24th. So this was just to expose you to it for the first time in this format, and let you know that councils have looked at it, and we'll get you the final soon. And that's when we would look for a vote.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Edit in there.
Oh, yes, yes. Thanks, Dave.
All right, we'll go on to the next item on our agenda, the Town of Yarmouth, or Dennis / Yarmouth relationship. I'd asked Dan to put this on the agenda. I think the last discussion that we had as a board was we were going to send the Town of Dennis a letter with regard to the DY Regional Agreement draft amendment that we had sent to the school committee, and asked them to comment on some specific sections of that agreement. You know, I think we haven't had any specific response from them at this point to that letter. None. I know I reviewed the agenda for tonight's select board meeting in Dennis, didn't see anything on the agenda for that, and I don't know when they have another finance committee meeting scheduled. But I think, you know, I think all of the our board is feeling some discomfort with regard to the overall relationship. The discussion we just had with regard to wastewater is, I think, important, and nearly as important as the school agreement. And you know, I think we need to talk about how we're going to move things forward with regard to all of the issues that involve cooperation between the towns. You know, I think it's been stated by various board members that there's a lack of comfort with moving forward in one area if we don't feel we have a cooperative, beneficial relationship, fair relationship in all areas. And so, you know, I had a meeting with a friend today who's a former district judge, federal judge, and he had been a mediator for some time, I think about 15 years, and talked with him about where we were in this agreement process, DY agreement process, and talked about, potential steps forward and thoughts he might have about agreements where there effectively was a stalemate, and try to get some of his experience in mediation to indicate how we might be able to make some progress. And, he was certainly, after we talked, and he reviewed our agreements, and we talked at some length about that. And, he certainly understood the difficulty in dealing with an agreement that it has the conditions that our DY regional agreement has, and the lack of conditions with regard to amendment process and so forth. And he recommended that we ask Dennis for a meeting and sit down with them face to face to figure out where we're headed as two communities in partnership. And lay everything on the table. And I guess I wanted to open that up for discussion among our board members. Should we have that kind of a meeting with Dennis in which we meet with their select board and their finance committee around a table and have a discussion about where our two towns are headed? And because, I don't think that, and personally, I don't think that we can charge ahead in one area and at the same time feel very uncomfortable in another area that has an equal financial impact on our town. So, I just kind of open that up for thoughts from our board and see if there are any other possible directions that could be suggested.
I don't have a copy of the letter. I know it was emailed to us today. Do you happen to have copies of that
No, I
letter?
don't have one with me.
Was the school committee CC'd on that at all? So that they knew that we,
I don't think that they were
I
offhand.
think it's important that you send it to Carol. I think it's important for them to know that we're still trying to have that conversation. Was there,
We essentially asked them three questions. One was what their position was on the 60-40 capital split in the agreement that we had sent to the school board. The other question was related to, are they in agreement with the student proportionate representation for school committee members? And the third component was, do they agree with the $2.9 million worth of agreed upon fixed costs, and what their position presently is on that?
and was there a request of a time for response at all?
I did not put a specific, I respectfully requested that it be, I think, acted on in a timely fashion. I didn't think it was gonna be helpful to do that. I wanted to be respectful to their board, for sure.
Okay. That was one suggestion that my friend made was with regard to timing. And he said, if we want to ask for a meeting, we should do that with a specific time frame in mind, and ask, within X number of days or whatever, so that we have some definition of what we can expect or not expect moving forward.
So I think we're at a critical point with this whole thing, because communication 2 weeks ago, when representatives of the school administration went up to MSBA to have the board, the MSBA board, vote on moving us through to the next phase of the project, the schematic design phase, they asked pointedly, apparently, what the plan for financing the school was. And of course, there isn't a plan right now. So I knew that had gone back to school administration, because they represented it and they made the answer to that effect, So MSBA is expecting very shortly some answer to that question as to, okay, we've approved you to go through this step. You know, normally, my experience has been that when you go at that meeting point, you know how you're gonna finance it. I believe when I've done school projects in the past, I had to go with the bond authorization vote in hand to do that level. So, I would think that if, now that they have had the letter since June 26th, probably would be appropriate at this point to put that out there as a suggestion, give them a date certain to respond back. Because if we're gonna stay on track with the project, all of this has to start to occur rather rapidly, because the final endpoint for this is very much near November, I think, for the next decision point for the MSP. We have a school building committee meeting tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be updated as to the next schedule of events, but we are getting very close to the finish point.
Okay.
Norm, I'm never going to say that meeting and talking isn't a good thing, because I think anytime we open up the lines of communication, but I think history, from my years sitting here, any of the joint meetings that we've had, they've been very non-committal in terms of getting a response from them. I'm hopeful that they'll respond to us in writing on those specific points, because we've been unable to really get a response to any of those questions for, you know, you've been working on it for many years.
Yeah.
We've sat at the table in terms of which is the best way to go, and you know, unless there's a specific agenda where we're going to talk about those specific 3 items and have a vote or some type of consensus, which just has not happened in the past. I mean, if that's the goal, then I'm all in favor of it. But to go and sit there and us talk about our feelings and them talk about their feelings, we all walk away with nothing is, I guess, just therapy.
Potentially.
No, but I mean, honestly, I mean, I'm thinking about how it will play out, and I know that the last few times we've been around a table, we've really gotten no commitment or response, unfortunately. I mean, you can't force them into making a decision, but at some point in time, we need one. So that's why I think I'm hopeful that they will respond in a timely manner, and I hope that they will do so in some type of vote or commitment in writing, so we have an answer. That's all we need, is an answer, one way or the other. We just need them to tell us where they're at.
Well, I think, you know, I agree with you and agree with your frustration. I think effectively we've put before their select board at this point our view of the options and of what we believe is a fair agreement. And lack of response on their part is, I think, an indication, or would be an indication, I'm not saying it is right now, could be an indication that we don't have a partner that's willing to work with us in a fair manner. And I think at this point we haven't put a time frame on it. I think that we should. And I think that, you know, I don't know if a meeting of the 2 boards and the finance committees together would be the most beneficial approach. But I think we haven't put a time frame on an expected response. I think we need to put a time frame on it. And if that means drafting another letter and, you know, perhaps proposing a meeting, but saying, in any case, if a meeting would not be fruitful, then please provide us with a response to our request by such and such a time frame. And if we don't get a response, then we know how to proceed at that point. You know, I'm certainly interested in hearing, you know, more comments about it. Any thoughts, Mark?
I don't want to drag this out. I think we gave them a letter. I just got a copy of it today.
Yeah.
I think we should give them some time to respond.
Yeah.
And it would be helpful if there was some follow-up. But as Dan has mentioned, there's some key decision-making points that are coming up. And I think at some point that those will end up forcing some discussion. But in the meantime, let's see if we can get some movement on this. I met with Cleon Turner over the weekend, and he was frustrated as well with the position of his own board. So hopefully,
What is the position of the board? It'd be good to know.
well, he's been trying to get them to take a position. In all the meetings that I've followed, he's been very outspoken in identifying issues, potential remedies, options. I think his participation has been incredibly constructive. And I know before he stepped down from the board, he literally spent an enormous amount of time in those last 2 selectmen meetings sort of outlining the issues, outlining where he thought there was some legitimate concern on the part of Yarmouth. And I honestly thought that his contribution, at least from my perspective, obviously you have all been in the weeds on this a lot longer than I have, but I honestly thought that his work on this, he laid out a record that's well documented in terms of why he believed that many of the issues that have been raised are legitimate criticisms and concerns, and he laid out a range of options in terms of how he thought Dennis could address them. And sort of he's also appealed to the board to sort of step forward with some additional recommendations. And when I spoke with him over the weekend, he was hopeful that they would address this and embrace this. I've certainly conveyed that interest myself, but we've put this letter out. I think let's give them some time to respond. I think they know where we're at, and I think it's very helpful for us to know that the former state representative and former selectman, who probably knows more about the school formula than just about anybody, has basically identified a number of very, very legitimate points that have been well chronicled in the local press. And I think it would be nice to see some movement on the other side of the river to embrace some of those. I mean, typically the way I try to address these negotiations is normally if you can start with an agreement on the problem in the inequity or where the formula is wrong, and then it opens the door for a very interesting conversation about your options. I'm not sure we've gotten there yet. I would like to at least have some consensus from the Dennis board in terms of where they may be in agreement on what the problems and issues are. But I'm not sure how quickly that's going to happen. We've got the letter. Let's give them some time to respond. And then I think after that, we need to sort of go over the next moves. But I know everybody's frustrated about this. And none more than former Selectman State Representative Cleon Turner. And I've been impressed with his passion. So he's been, and he continues to do this, to plead with his board. So he's there with us, sort of urging them to step up and respond in some way. So I very much appreciate his service on this, and I appreciate him passionately speaking to his own board, urging them to address it.
Mike, you have any thoughts at this point?
That I can repeat publicly.
Of
First
course.
of all, I admire your patience and your stamina and your eternal optimism. I really do. And I agree with Mark's observations about Cleon. Cleon provided a lot of leadership. He was the chair of this subcommittee, and it was very fair. He was very even-handed. He pointed out the pros and cons of different aspects of the agreement, different funding formulae. Unfortunately, he's not involved anymore, and I think that if he was, maybe this would be moving forward a little bit better than it is. What to do from here? I think if we're going to have a meeting, I don't believe summit conferences are really going to lead to anything productive. If we were going to meet, what I would suggest, Norm, is that you and I ask to meet with the 2 selectmen from Dennis and have a candid eyeball-to-eyeball conversation about what their intentions are and whether they really want to make some progress with amending this regional school agreement on a more equitable basis that both towns can live with. Secondarily, we could put a deadline on the letter, but if they don't respond, then, you know, you're going to be left wondering, is the lack of a response in itself the response, or have they just not gotten to it yet? You never know. Sometimes the lack of a response is a message. I think we'll get more out of it if we tell them we want to meet. If you want to throw the 2 town administrators in there, that's fine too. But I don't think we should have a large contingent.
Right.
I think, and based on what we've been through, I think we can have some direct conversation about those specific items that are in the letter and whether or not there's agreement. If they say no to that meeting, that's all I have to know.
Mm-hmm.
That in itself is an answer to me.
There you go.
Well, certainly, I think, you know, Dan's pointed out that the meeting tomorrow, there's undoubtedly going to be some pressure with regard to the financing of the new school. So that may shed some light on it, and maybe we can think further about timing of a 2-on-2 meeting, perhaps after that. And you know, Eric, I haven't asked you. Did you have any other thoughts on it? Any other frustrations you haven't previously expressed?
No, I won't repeat myself, but, you know, at this point, if the MSBA is starting to ask questions about financing mechanisms for the new school, perhaps our time is better spent communicating with them and saying that if Dennis does not come to the table with this new regional agreement, then Yarmouth will not agree to finance the new school. I mean, go over their heads. The school is really the only leverage we have to get anything done.
That's an interesting thought. I mean, you know, certainly we have Wednesday night. We've got the meeting to see what is said at that point. We could evaluate our options at our next.
Well, I think Monday night, the
Board meeting.
16th, was the night some decision from the school committee was supposed to come, so I'm mindful of that Cape Tech option they have to be able to go direct to the ballot.
Well, you know, I cannot foresee the town of Yarmouth voting for a new school for which they are going to pay over 65% of. I cannot believe that will happen. And quite honestly, you know, with the finance committee doing its work, I'm not sure it will pass in Dennis either. But I think, you know, we're wasting our time. You know, if things are going to stay as they are, we don't need a new school. Yarmouth needs to decide its own direction and stop waiting for Dennis to decide on our destiny. Let's form our own destiny instead of being dependent upon somebody else. I'm tired. I've been doing this this is my 10th year doing this. I'm tired of this nonsense, asking for meetings and being put off, stabbed in the back, people cowering at finance committee decisions. I'm tired of it. Let's say to the MSBA, there is not going to be a school vote if there is not a new regional agreement.
I'll make a motion.
So, you know, my suggestion would be, Dan, to perhaps throw that out tomorrow night, that we intend to take it higher if we don't get the results we want. See what that does. Very unfortunate, because I think that Yarmouth needs 2 new schools. But that's a completely different conversation.
The other thing, though, is that Cleon, in an interview in the Register, was quoted as saying that that the school agreement was not part. The new school was in the capital allocations were not part and parcel of the other negotiations. I noticed that
I thought that was an interesting comment.
they carved that out.
For him, but it is for us.
Yeah, I don't consider us subject to his opinion. I mean, that's his opinion.
Hey, Norm, I'm on your side of the table.
Yeah.
Don't make any mistake about that.
His opinion, and
agree.
you know, I don't think, based on our previous discussions at this board level, that we believe that at all.
No.
You know, we're not willing to step up and pay just whatever the.
I think if you go
price
back
is.
in time, it was Mr. Turner who encouraged us to get this process underway
Oh, yeah.
because of the school
Oh, yeah,
project. So it
absolutely.
leads me to believe that
Yep.
there'd been a change of course to lead to that opinion along the line.
Right.
Yeah.
I think Eric's point's well taken. Why would Yarmouth taxpayers agree to pay basically about 2/3 of the cost of a new school? What's in it for them? The one that really has the most to gain is Dennis by doing that.
Be doing a complete disservice to our taxpayers if we didn't, make sure we did it right. It's an enormous amount of money, and I think it's more important than to do it correctly than to do it in an expeditious way that is not necessarily going to be the best way. So, you know, I support what Eric's saying.
One of the issues here that we keep hearing, I know after listening to several of their meetings and several of Dennis's meetings, select board meetings, and they've held several meetings between their finance committee and select board. And there have been repetitive comments by Jim Plaff to their select board that Yarmouth is offering nothing. And there seems to be a total lack of understanding that we have a substantial amount of property and public services devoted to a new school and to the existing school system. And several years ago, when we proposed a payment in lieu of taxes, they were all over that, rejecting that concept. You know, I think the rejection on the part of the Dennis Finance Committee of any financial responsibility or any acknowledgement that Yarmouth adds tremendous value to this school system by virtue of the property that is within our boundaries is, I think, it's disingenuous. I could call it something else, but it's at least disingenuous. So, you know, I think that's been a problem all along. But that's for Dennis to deal with. So, you know, let's see what happens tomorrow evening. And you know, I think Eric's suggestion moving forward. I don't know, Tracy, if you want to put forward a motion.
I mean, I think
that's fine.
we have to do something. I think that I personally do not see them separate from each other, because again, I think we have to do it right. I don't think what we're asking for is unfair or more than I think a fair partnership request. So, I mean, at some point in time, I think we have to have our voice heard by somebody. This process is being pushed forward in a manner that I'm not comfortable with. I don't want to lose the state reimbursement. I think that's important, and it's significant. And, you know, as Eric said, we need 2 schools, and if we don't have a partner that wants to step up to the plate and see value in what we offer, then we as a board need to make a decision on going in a different direction. So I've made it very clear that I will not support the new school building under the agreement that we have now. I have no problem telling the MSBA that. I don't know if we can speak for our voters, but I know that we speak to a lot of voters, you know, daily about how they feel, and I feel that my opinion is a representation of the people that I speak to. And frankly, the reason why I thought having the school committee put it before the voters directly is because I feel like the people of Dennis see the value in our partnership. It's the leadership that is the issue. So I don't know how you get there, but I think right now we need to put the brakes on and we need to get this done. So if we need to tell the MSBA that, and we can ask for an extension or whatever we could do, but under this agreement, I think I have no problem going on the record, and I think MSBA should know where we are. Whether now that's appropriate time to do that or not, I don't know. But I don't think it's gonna hurt. At some point in time, we need to slow down and make sure we do this correctly.
Okay, let's see where we are on, after tomorrow's meeting, and we can address that in our next agenda if that's appropriate, so, okay. Moving forward, the Board of Selectmen Boarding Committee actions, we have approval of minutes for January 23rd, January 30th, February 6th, February 13th, and February 27th, 2018. Do you have a motion?
I'm sorry, you're going to minutes?
Yes.
We're going to skip over number 1?
No. No, do we have Boarding Committee actions?
Yeah.
No.
Did you want to skip over that and deal with that later?
No, we can deal with that now.
That's what we normally do.
I'm sorry. Mark, I didn't see the items in our packet. Go ahead.
There we go. What I'd like to do is move to accept the resignations of 2 individuals, Judith Recknagel as an alternate from the Old Kings Highway Committee, and George Keefe as a member of the Golf Enterprise Committee.
So moved with thanks.
Yes. Moved with
Second.
thanks. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Carries. We have 2 individuals to appoint to the Recycling and Solid Waste Advisory Committee. In your packets, there's information about Abigail Santos and Deb Stetson. I move to appoint them for a 3-year term through February 2021.
I don't mean to get into
Sure.
specific details on this, but I find it odd that their addresses are completely blacked out here. That never used to be the case. They did that with phone numbers, but now we don't even know if they're, I assume somebody's looked to make sure they're Yarmouth residents.
Oh, yes.
I don't know why that would be a private matter, where they live.
I think typically this has happened in the past. But I can certainly get that information. I don't see that being an issue. They are the Yarmouth residents,
That's great.
so. Again, I'm happy to move them, but if there's an objection, just to
I don't
verify.
object to it. I just personally would like to see that they live here.
They do,
Okay.
and I'll get you their addresses. So I made a motion.
Those
Do I have a second?
recommendations.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? It carries. Thank you.
Can I just ask one more? Did
Sure.
you put the dates? Did you say the dates?
Yes, I
I'm
did.
sorry.
3-year term through February 2021.
Okay, thank you.
And the last individual is for the library board. Her name is Pam Barton. In your packet is a fairly impressive resume about Pam. I move to appoint her to a 3-year term on the library board through the date. Bear with me, I can't read this.
It's February 2020.
February 2021. Is there a second?
Have a second?
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. That concludes my report,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I think now we can go on with the minutes. Thank you. We have the minutes of January 23rd, 2018, January 30th, 2018, February 6th, February 13th, and February 27th, 2018.
Remove the minutes as submitted.
Have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion on the minutes? All right, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. All right, upcoming agenda.
I don't have one either.
Oh, no, it's not, I don't see it in the packet, I apologize for that.
Okay.
Under that topic, though,
Yes.
I'd like to be able to discuss with the board potential format for next Tuesday night's Vineyard Wind meeting. We have to publish an agenda by Thursday. There's been a significant amount of public input to my office relative to some level of degree of public participation. Is this going to be the only opportunity for Vineyard Wind to speak to the public with the board involved? So I put that out there for the board to discuss tonight, to give me some guidance as to how we should go forward with what the agenda should look like and what your expectations are for next Tuesday. I know we had discussed at the last meeting that we could, in one particular format, collect questions from the public on index cards as they came in and moderate at some later point in the meeting the delivery of the questions to the applicant. This way, that would assure that any duplicates and, you know, any, I suppose, commentary that wasn't productive to the dialogue would be neutralized, and we could make sure that we get to the substance of the matter. We are collecting a fair amount of questions already coming to us by email. I did forward to the Vineyard Wind reps today all of our questions, including the recent submission yesterday of a series of additional questions. Altogether, I think the board itself has generated maybe close to 50 questions that they should come armed and be prepared to discuss that with us, the answers to. I tentatively had sent the chair an agenda today as to what it could look like. I did, for his consideration, put out about 15 minutes for public commentary, which is not routine in a workshop, but I think if you held folks to 2 minutes of commentary, they could speak their piece, move on, and then an hour devoted to your time with the applicant to ask your questions. And then the last 45 minutes of the meeting would be the one in which a moderator would ask the questions on behalf of the publicly submitted questions, and we'd wrap up sometime around 8:30.
Would we consider that a workshop?
Well,
I mean, we don't have to.
you don't have to. I mean, but, you know, do you want to, you know, originally, and I think it's important for folks to appreciate this, the original intent, and I have explained this to folks, that the only opportunity the board gets to dialogue and present an opportunity to make a statement or interact in this fashion is at a board meeting because of the open meeting law regulations and whatnot. So there's a lot of unanswered questions specifically that the board has, and the board is eventually going to be the entity that potentially could adopt a proposed host community agreement. There was never an intent to have this perceived as like the only talking point the public will ever have with these folks. In fact, I asked Vineyard Wind today if they would be willing to, as part of a listening event, because we're collecting all the answers that you get, we get, so that it helps us to craft whatever negotiating document we need to craft. But if there's a lot of community commentary that needs to get spoken to, I'm more than willing to work with Vineyard Wind to go out into the neighborhood pockets and host those in a forum that's productive to get exchange of dialogue. Because I think the more opportunity that we allow the public to come in a fashion to ask questions, the better it is. And I know that when you put we've had to ask or a request to change the venue here to get a much larger one. Those don't tend to be very productive opportunities to exchange information. I'd rather go out into these neighborhood pockets where people have an interest and dialogue with them directly, listen to what their questions are and what the answers could be from Vineyard Wind. So there's that option available after next Tuesday night as well, if Vineyard Wind would want to accompany us on that effort.
Comments?
Well, I kind of disagree. I think that the public expects to be heard. I think that we should, to the extent we can for time, allow that and allow a venue for that to be able to happen. I think people come, they don't, I think it's kind of sending a mixed message that we really don't want you to come and speak. So we need to decide whether or not we're going to have a public forum or we're not. If we want input, I think we should have a full-fledged public forum and listen to the people, and perhaps we need to have them back for our own discussion. I'm not sure, but I kind of feel like we're sending mixed messages. So if we're prepared to hear the public, we should be prepared to hear the public. If not, then, you know, I'm nervous about a card scenario where they would be censored. I don't know if people will feel that that's a fair process. I think we do need to ask that duplication not happen, but, you know, we'll probably get to 3 questions, you know, so all the people are going to come here, they're going to leave frustrated. So, I don't know, I think we need to make a decision whether or not we're going to have a forum for us, or we're going to have a public hearing, a public forum, and give it the time that it requires. Perhaps we need to do that first and then have our own, I'm not sure, but obviously it's going to be a lot to fit into one time if we do it correctly. But I don't want to give the public the wrong message that we don't really want to hear them. We want to just, you know, I mean, 50 questions, that alone, what we've asked, is going to be so difficult. I mean, they haven't answered anything yet. I'm hoping to get that information in advance. Maybe in writing will help ease some of the people. But I have a feeling that it's going to, and maybe we could have a bigger place and 2 people show up. I don't know. But I certainly don't want to give the appearance that we're, you know, if we're here and there's not enough room, it's just I don't know. That's my thought.
There's 2 issues that you're bringing up. One is order and how we approach the questions, and the second is venue.
Well, I agree with Dan. I think people in their mind, they want to speak, you know, and you know, they think that this is going to be the only one. I don't think it is.
No.
But if we are going to, which it's my opinion that they want to speak to us because we are the ones that are doing it. So I think that we have to hold some type of public forum. You know, giving it to them on the side and having meetings, I think, is all well and good, but we don't get to hear that information collectively, and I think that's problematic.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I agree with Tracy. I think I would rather hear what the citizens have to say, and I'm very much interested in hearing what the responses are. I think for me, and I may be in the minority here, but I'm interested in hearing a lot of the exchange of information. And I think it could be very, very helpful. I don't feel any compelling need for me, as a member of the board, to speak. I'm very much interested in listening and giving the residents of the town a platform in which they can speak directly to the developers. I don't know if there have been forums set up, but for whatever reason, they've been poorly attended. So it's nice to hear that there is a lot of interest, and I do think it's helpful for us to be here to listen to what our residents have to say and what their concerns are. I'm planning on learning something at this. So I hope my preference would be more time based on for the residents and the people that are coming here to ask questions, and less time for me. I'm not particularly interested in, you know, speechifying or having a lot to say. I think a lot of the concerns that we've expressed they're well aware of, and I would assume that many people in the audience that will be here will share and echo some of the points that we've raised. So I just think the more time that we give to the residents, I think the better.
How do we, you know, we're going kind of on an assumption. I know you said the public would be aware of what we've asked. I'm not sure that a lot of people are aware of exactly what we've asked.
Yeah, so what we would do is, once I got the guidance from tonight's meeting as to how we're going to format that, we would put that out on social media and also on the town webpage and on Channel 18 to get that information out. Already there's, using the grapevine that communicates in town, there's been a lot of commentary that's come back. You know, one of the, you know, just listening to you just now, you know, one of the things we could do is at a later date after we get some further information is schedule something at Matakey's Auditorium, and that is a forum in which the people can clearly come, and it's much larger, it accommodates more. I guess I would be mindful that Vineyard Wind is in this process of waiting for their determination from their responses on the draft environmental impact. So to the point of how much specificity are they going to ask when they've actually gone on the record to answer a lot of the questions, even though we didn't like what the answers were. That's the document that they were legally required to communicate to us by the state law, the MEPA process. So, you know, it could be a situation where, you know, they just parrot back the answers that we've already had from the filing, although we do have some new ones. But there's no perfect answers. So we'd have to decide next Tuesday, do we want to give 3 hours, 4 hours? How much of it, what the format looks like. If we can determine that tonight, I can communicate that to the public, and we could be ready for that.
I think the time depends upon the direction that we decide to go. If we're going to listen and have our questions answered, that's one thing, and we have a public forum later, I think that, you know, that would be two different scenarios completely.
Well, I agree with Mark. I mean, I don't see why we have to say anything. I mean, the burden's going to be on you, Norm, to keep it civil. But yeah, right. I mean, I too am interested in hearing the question. That they know our questions. We don't need to sit here and repeat our questions. I mean, they haven't given us answers yet. They're not likely to give us any next week. So let the public beat up on them. I'm just going to sit here and watch. But you know, you can't let it go on all night.
Well, I think, you know, we have to, I think we need to expect that our questions will be answered, though. I mean, you know, and I don't know if, you know, it's appropriate to give Vineyard Wind, you know, 15 minutes, half an hour to talk about the specifics in response to the questions that we've already raised.
Well, 50 questions, responding, if he's going to sit here and respond to every one of them.
No, so I submitted 50, you know, we've compiled about 50. The idea there would be, there's not a lot of new ones, I think, that are going to come up, because we've culled that from a variety of different communications with the board. There are a couple that do come to mind. I mean, Eric and I have dialogued a little bit about, you need to answer the question, frankly, about why did you pick Lewis Bay and put all your eggs in that basket? I mean, that's critically a single most important one, and I expressed that to them. You better come prepared to answer that question, because that'll dictate a lot of how the future goes. The other one would be as it relates to, why hasn't there been a willingness by the applicant to step up to the plate to help this town get the technical expertise and the legal expertise? You know, when I read your public literature that you've put out, you've got $30 million that gives to all these other organizations to save the whale, to create jobs. Well, how come there isn't a pot of $5 million and $1 million perpetually for the next 15 years for the towns of Barnstable and Yarmouth offered to do whatever offset there is? I mean, it seems to me that if you really wanted to be a community partner, you would have come to the table with something like that already. So those are the kinds of questions that I'm particularly personally frustrated on, is there's been a lot of promises already made in public documents by this organization for everybody else except for the two towns where this thing impacts completely, right? So beyond that, a lot of them are, one of the questions that came up today in the dialogue was, well, why would we, I don't want to be sarcastic about it, I'll try to check myself, but the Lewis Bay dredging situation, you know, that's an important point that Dave Young made tonight, that, you know, one of the things that we had early dialogued on, if we could increase the flows coming out of Lewis Bay, that helps with the nitrogen dissipation, but that gives us no credit towards solving the problem. But in the end, how much does that help the nitrogen situation in the Lewis Bay water quality? Well, one of the first things we talked to them about after we had hashed out some details on the street access details was, would you help participate in a baseline study of the health of Lewis Bay? We got no commitment for that other than to say, well, we would consider being a partner in that. I'd like to see them come next Tuesday with, we will do this X, Y, Z for you as a town, and as a showing of, you know, we've listened by now to all the desires and concerns of the community. This is an opportunity for them to show to us actual commitment to it. I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar behemoth, and I've communicated this to the governor's surrogates. it's not fair that the towns of Yarmouth and Barnstable are alone on this when it's a state priority to get this project done. It's just not. And there's been like esoteric offers of help, but there's been nothing concrete provided to me yet.
How much time do you think that they need to you know?
I asked them to provide a 15-minute, tell us now what the update on the project is and where you stand. There have been some changes. I mean, nobody expected them to be offered the 800 megawatts. We were planning for 400, so that changes the dynamic. So tell us where you are now and what the next steps are in that process, as opposed to going back in time and rehashing that. So I offered them 15 minutes of potential time to update you as to where they are today. I do know that there has been some further analytical work done in Covell's Beach, the alternate landing site. They might have some new information. There's been some further analysis done in Lewis Bay on a few things, apparently, from what I understand. So that would be germane details for the conversation. But then to get right into answering the questions that come to them, to spend most of the time that night to answer the questions.
Okay. I have a sense that we ought to, 15 is probably an awful short time period for them to do that in.
I'm mindful of the fact that if we gave them
15
more
is probably going to
time.
be 30.
Yeah, that's what I mean, you know what I mean? And then the next thing you know, you're eating into everybody, because everybody wants, from what I've heard, an opportunity to ask their questions. And what their concern was, and it's a legitimate concern, is if the answer is evasive or isn't to their satisfaction, they wanted an opportunity to continue with a follow-up dialogue, almost like an interrogation. So that's where, to Eric's point, the meeting order and the rules on that have to be such that we can move along and make sure everybody's got an opportunity to say something, you know?
I think it'd be, from my personal observation or thoughts on it are, okay, let's allow that opening statement. That's fine. I think that makes sense. Allowing the public then to ask their questions and allowing a fixed period of time, trying to avoid duplicates as best we can, and then allow our board to ask cleanup questions that address specific things that we had asked, perhaps, that did not get addressed in the public session, and or any follow-up on public comments that may have stimulated further thoughts.
So would you want to open the meeting and go right to their presentation, no normal public comment, go right to their presentation for a period of time, and then get right into the public's question and answer?
That would be my thinking on it. And does that make sense at this stage?
Yeah, because there's no other item on our agenda.
No, this is it.
Specifically for that,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's not like.
And I think allowing the public to get to it and
Exactly.
is important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's, let them lay out the questions. I'm comfortable giving up my time at the end so that the public can have more time.
Well, I think we need to be flexible on how much time that we're going to allow.
Well, my feeling is we're going to have multiple bites at the apple.
Right.
But this is
Yeah.
a forum where a lot of people in the community want to say something, they want to speak, and they want to hear direct answers, so let's give it to them.
I think to that, good point. I think to that point, we need probably at the tail end of their opening remarks, we need a 2-minute or 5-minute discussion of their commitment to public sessions going forward. I think we need to hear that they are willing to have X number of sessions over the next 30 to 60 days in our community to answer further questions and to get into further dialogue and information sessions. And I think that's having that commitment from them is very important.
Well, I guess my 2 cents on that would be, what I'm going to commit to in the future is going to be dictated by any type of commitment from them at our next meeting. So if they're not willing to make an investment to help us and not willing to give us the answers, then to me, we should really consider our future negotiations. I
Okay.
mean,
Okay, that's fair.
that's my
Yeah.
opinion. I hate to be like that, but if we're gonna rip the Band-Aid off, let's just do it. I mean, honestly, I would like to continue to discuss with them, but if they're not gonna be willing to put in their effort and doing anything for our community, then I'm not interested in talking to them anymore. We have too much stuff to do. We could actually affect some positive change.
Just for your own visual appearance on things, when they've come to us in the past, I read John Henderson's commentary to the Department of Public Utilities. He's spot on this one. So we sit in there as municipal officers, and we are hit with a phalanx of high-paid consultants, lawyers from some of the best legal firms around in these parts.
You got nothing to fight back with.
A fabulous environmental consultant, great engineering expertise. And you can imagine it's me, it's Carl, it's Ed Centio, and it's...
You don't give yourself enough
Well,
credit.
no, you know, I'm going to say, you know, it's not that we weren't dressed nicely or anything like that, but to John Henderson's point, we're running a town here, and this is their one job, is to get this cable landed somewhere on this coast.
Right.
And not that we felt outmatched or outwitted or anything like that, but it'd be real nice to know that we have something like that available to make sure that we're not taking advantage of it.
Correct.
One of the things that's become most distasteful for me in this process has been the idea that negotiations are occurring with Barnstable and Yarmouth not in unison. And I find that real problematic.
It's
that
pitting one community
It's pitting
against
one
the-
community
right.
against the other, and frankly, go to Covell's Beach, for my life simplifies dramatically, except for with the DY in Mattakey School. But if they went over there, my life becomes that much easier around here. But that's a serious issue, because the worst possible scenario that can lay out for everybody is that a tremendous inequity in an agreement. There's no neutral third-party arbiter. The state, you would think, would, because it is a big state-looked-at project, that they would have some stake in this to help mediate. It's hard for us to know what a fair deal is.
Right.
And I think in business, Mike, you know, help me with this one, a fair agreement is one in which both parties can fairly say they were at least represented appropriately and walked away with a certain level of desires that were achieved. I can't say that we're having that situation right now.
I've heard judges say that a fair agreement is one that neither party loves.
I've heard that. I tried to stay away from that one, but
Yeah, give and take, you know, and you have to be respectful of the other side's position, as well as your own, if you're going to come to an understanding. But I think you're right. I agree with you that we don't have the technical and legal resources to be able to do the kind of work we should be doing on behalf of the people in this community.
and our taxpayers shouldn't be stuck with the bill. That's Tracy's made that point time and
No, the state or the developer. I mean, and/or.
Developer, they have, Dan already said they have $30 million they're willing to dole out, but not to the community it's
They
going
don't
to
really
impact.
care where it comes from, as long as
I
it
care where it
comes.
comes from. I feel very strongly, any other developer that wanted to come do business in our town, we wouldn't be looking for the state. The developer should bear the costs. And if they're not willing to make a commitment, I think that tells us what we need to know.
There certainly is a differentiation. I mean, this is a business proposition on the part of Vineyard Wind. It's different from most businesses in that most businesses, if they made a huge development proposal, there would be a lot of benefit ongoing into the future in terms of jobs and favorable impact on the local economy. And we don't get that in this case. The only thing that is really being proposed is the personal property taxes on the
assets that they have within the town limits. That's correct, absolutely.
And with risks that we're all pretty uncomfortable with. Whether those risks are real or not, we have no way of evaluating. We're at in a very difficult situation. And
The other thing is, if they come through Yarmouth, they only can generate revenue because of us. So
Right.
what does the revenue? I call it a revenue sharing agreement look
Right.
like on 800 megawatts of offshore wind? There is no, I mean, I negotiated one years ago with a developer paid-for consultant, by the way, for a 440 megawatt gas power plant. But there's dozens of those power plants across the country, but the developer paid for that valuation. This one, this is brand new, offshore, 800 megawatts. Is it like Plymouth is 10 million from the power plant there, and Sandwich Canal received $2 million in annual benefits? Are we somewhere in between that? I couldn't tell you that. I have no way of valuing what wind turbine energy looks like, whether it's going to be reliable, like when you flip the switch on an atomic plant, it runs all the time until you flip it off. Same thing with Canal Power. This is totally a different scenario that we have no idea on how to come up with a profit, a loss calculation of what the revenue is going to be. I've never seen any of that from the developer.
Right.
And I think we should, even though we don't see physically the impact of it necessarily, visually, there is an impact, no question. We should, because of us being here, they were allowed to make this revenue, we should partake in that.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It should be a revenue-sharing approach.
So, okay, well, I guess we've kind of settled on a format, I think, at this stage. I think
I'll
the
get a
general
draft
consensus,
agenda out to you tomorrow.
Comfortable with that?
Yeah.
I think that the difficult control part is with regard to the questions, and, and hopefully we can avoid duplication and so forth.
Probably have a sign-in.
Excuse me?
They should probably have a sign-in if they want to speak, go in order.
We've had some questions from the public with regard to, is this an appropriate location?
We could try to change a venue. I mean, we have time to do that.
The senior center's always
The
a good
senior
place,
center's a
too.
venue, yeah. Mattakey's Auditorium potentially. I don't, if it's a nice.
What I've heard from people were two things. One of them is, we've already discussed the public input, and the other one was venue. Supposedly, there's going to be a lot of people that don't feel they'll be able to get seating here. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what the concern is.
If you'd like, I could reach out to the school department to see if.
If Mattakey's is available, and
Well, in either case, it won't be live. We'd have to.
We'd have to tape it.
Tape
yeah.
it,
yeah. So that would be, in either case, those two alternatives. What would be the capacity of the senior center?
I don't know, I'd have to take a look at that. It's much larger space than this, for
Right.
sure, but I don't know what the seating capacity is registered with. I could look at that tomorrow.
Yeah. All right, if you could take a look at that, then we can,
Sure.
we're going to have to make a fairly quick decision on the venue. But I think that, in the spirit of not putting a damper on public participation, at least in this first attempt, we should certainly allow for adequate space for people to get in and be able to hear. And, I think doing this at this time recognizes that, maybe for whatever reason, the past meetings that Vineyard Wind has held have either not been well publicized, or there were other things up in the air that had to be decided. So this is certainly leading to a climax point, and I think we need to allow for that kind of input. So, okay.
We'll go under that plan, and I'll get back to you tomorrow with that information that what would be available.
What time will that meeting be held?
6 o'clock was the planning time.
Okay. Individual items. Okay. Tracy?
All set.
All set? Mike?
I'm all set.
Mark?
I just wanted to mention that I will be, I've been asked by the Brewster Board of Selectmen to serve for a period of 4 to 6 months as their interim town administrator. In my discussions with them, I made it very, very clear that I have obligations here in Yarmouth, and that I wouldn't do anything to interfere with my work here on the board or in the community. And we're working on an agreement, and we'll see how things go. But I'm looking forward to it. It would start next week, and I've received a lot of very nice comments here in town, but I've been reassuring people I don't have any plans to step down, and it's a 4 to 6 month commitment. I have no intentions to be a candidate for the full-time job. I've worked with this board before. It's a good group. It's a terrific town hall staff, and my hope is just to come in here and help fill the void for a little while until they can complete their process in selecting a full-time permanent town manager. So,
Okay.
just an update there.
Okay. Thank you. All right, I don't have any individual items. Dan,
Yeah, on the consent agenda, there's some usual donations, there's some rather large ones as well. But also of note would be fee waiver request for the Mill Hill residents to visit the beach, to take a bus with their residents. They described that they
Just by
very much...
point of reference, we have never waived that fee, ever,
Yeah, I don't remember it coming last year, but...
Ever.
no.
because it's a very, we've been very, and this is no disrespect to them, and I think what they're doing is fabulous. Perhaps we could get a donation of $35, but I think that it would not be, I think it would set precedent from this board to begin that practice.
Okay.
Well, they say in their materials, though, that they're not really going to get out and use the beach. It's just going to be to drive the people up there and let them take a view of the water. And
Right, they drive through, which I
I
think
mean,
is wonderful, but
they could do that at Bass Hole, right?
You could,
Free of charge.
if you could drive in there. I hear it's tough to get down some of those roads,
It might be.
but the boardwalk's almost done.
You're right. Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if you want to pull that from the agenda.
I think it's important. I think we should make sure we get them a sticker in some way if,
I'll move the consent agenda with the exception of the sticker request.
so.
Okay. Any further discussion? Those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
We won't
Opposed?
get into, we won't get into
Okay.
the history of the disposal.
There we
sticker.
are. All right. Town administrator updates.
Yeah, I would like to let you know that the restoration work of Town Hall has finally been completed as it relates to the flood-impacted locations. The contractor finished up a couple weeks ago. It was, they did great workmanship, no question. It just took an excruciating long period of time. The staff was very patient, but the outcome was good. So that was excellent there. The other issue is at a further date, I'll write a memo to you on some other upgrades that are planned for the building as well. There has been an ongoing concern with staff related to security issues, and I think we've begun to address those. The building, as you know, because you spend a lot of time here, it's a hard building to secure all the time. And actually, I think in my first week on the job last year was Super Bowl Sunday. I got contacted by the police. Somebody had found their way in to the building on Super Bowl Sunday, and that's still perplexing because there was no ability to know who it was or this or that. And we never got an answer, but that wasn't the first time. And then on another particular time, I was in the building, and an unfounded 911 call went out, and the police came. And then the staff in general, there's been some patrons that have come into the building that have we've had some issues with as it relates to the future. So we worked with the police department and our insurance consultant to come up with a strategy to begin enhancing the security. And I think in this day and age in a public building, it's fair to say the staff concerns were definitely well noted. And we definitely do have people in the building late at night. Often after a meeting wraps up, it could be staff by themselves. And right now, there could be a long period of time that the building stays, unlocked, and sometimes on occasion, if somebody happened to, we had this in the past with the cleaning company not show up at a particular time to lock it. So we encapsulated all this information and deployed a plan, and I'll update you in the coming days as to where we were at with step 1 and what step 2 and 3 looks like on that topic. But security of our personnel are first and foremost on my mind every day, so. Other than that, I think I will be putting forward to you, I want to thank Selectman Forrest for all of the interviews he did on the Water Resources group. We will be looking forward to put tentative names in front of you on that very shortly, so we can get that group ready to go. The other one that came to mind was a charge. I'll have that available to you to consider for the Public Works Building Committee. Put some information together for that, and I'll get that to you very shortly, probably for the July 24th meeting. The other project, it kind of fell off everybody's radar screen, but the chairman of the group came to me yesterday and updated me on their progress, and they'd like to come in front of you sometime probably in the early fall. It's the Library Feasibility Study Group. They have wrapped up much of their work. They are ready to present to the board where they are at today with their findings, and they'd like to get your input as to what they think what you think the next steps for that group. They have some ideas what they would like to do in the next couple of years, but along the way, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that these people, those folks have worked really hard over the last couple of years on that program, and it's this phase one is now close to being wrapped up. So that'll be for the fall. Other than that, like I said, we're just absolutely inundated with the Vineyard Wind situation. It's just like an avalanche every day. So we're getting through. I want to thank Carl. He's doing yeoman's work. Our legal staff, we've accommodated much of the requests for the responses to date within our retainer. So Jay Tallerman's group has been very fabulous on this. Kelly Grant has been part of this. Like I said, it's been an all-team effort to stay on top of it to date. So, and Chris Greeley, I can't go. Her work at no cost to us to reproduce documents, to make them available. She's been fabulous through this whole process to make sure that we have the most up-to-date filings. The latest book that came through was like 1,300 pages or something, and she took it upon herself to make the copies for us. So it's been great. Been a real, like I said, a real team effort. A lot of thanks to go around.
I'd just like to acknowledge, read today about the work that was done on the Taylor Bray
Yes, by the
Boardwalk.
Sheriff's Department. Yeah.
And on the Grays Beach Boardwalk, and work to come on that, and the amount of money that was saved on both projects.
I will put like a letter of thank you in front of the board to send to the Sheriff's Department.
Absolutely.
Because I know Special Sheriff Jeff Perry was a big part of that, getting that done, and they stepped up right from the first day, and we certainly wouldn't be where we are today without their efforts, so it's been a big help.
I can say from personal observation that that people really appreciated having the boardwalk open even 2/3 of the way. They could see what was going on. They saw the progress being made, and I think the comments I received were very positive. So
It looked good.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You gave a new meaning to the words prevailing wage.
Actually, I think in the paper they used cream of the crop. I thought that was a pretty good term.
Cream of the crop.
Cream of the crop, helping us out, yeah.
All right, anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?